Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was a member of the Red Hair Pirates and fell in love with Makino? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Fox and the Songbird. The sea breeze over Fuchsia village carried three distinct scents: the sharp tang of salt, the damp rot of old fishing nets, and the hearty, infectious aroma of roasting boar. The last one belonged, as it so often did, to the Red Hair Pirates. Their ship, the formidable Red Force, was a beast of dark wood and proud sails, currently slumbering at the docks like a patient predator. Its crew, however, was anything but slumbering. On the dusty patch of ground between the docks and the treeline, a whirlwind of motion kicked up clouds of red dirt. Lucky Roo, a man whose spherical frame defied the laws of physics with every nimble step, weaved and bobbed, a half-eaten leg of meat still clutched in one hand. His opponent was a blur of sunset orange and sun-kissed blonde, moving with a liquid grace that was both utterly out of place and perfectly at home amongst the boisterous pirates. Too slow, Roo. Naruto Uzumaki laughed, his voice a low, pleasant tenor that held none of the shrillness of his youth. He slid under a sweeping punch that carried the weight of a small boulder, his hand brushing the ground for a flicker of a second before he sprang back up on the other side. "You're just too damn slippery, Kitsune," Roo bellowed, taking a furious bite of his food. "Hold still so I can hit you." The rest of the crew, lounging on crates and leaning against the hull of their ship, cheered them on with the casual air of spectators at a favorite sport. Yasopp, the crew's peerless sniper, had a lazy grin on his face as he polished his rifle. "He's got you, Roo. You're fighting a shadow." "Shut it, Yasopp," Roo roared, launching himself forward in a surprisingly fast charge. Naruto didn't retreat. He stood his ground, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. His blue eyes, once wide and wild, were now sharper, calmer, holding a depth of experience that belied his age. The faint, whisker-like marks on his cheeks seemed less like a childish feature and more like the markings of a sleek, dangerous predator. He wore a simple, open-front orange jacket over a black shirt, dark pants, and sturdy boots, practical clothes for a life of motion. Just as Roo's fist was about to connect, Naruto's form dissolved into a puff of white smoke. The punch met empty air, throwing the big man off balance. A moment later, the real Naruto tapped him lightly on the back of the neck. "Gotcha." Roo stumbled to a halt, panting. He turned, a grudging respect in his eyes. "One of these days, I'll land one. One of these days." "Keep telling yourself that," Naruto said, his smile widening. He offered a hand, which Roo slapped good-naturedly. The sparring match was over as quickly as it began. It was a daily ritual, a way to stay sharp, but for Naruto, it was also a way to feel grounded. The solid thud of his boots on the earth, the burn in his muscles, the easy camaraderie of his crew, they were anchors. "His speed is unnatural," a new voice commented, low and thoughtful. Ben Beckman, Shank's first mate, stepped out from the shadow of the main mast, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He was a man carved from granite and intellect, and his gaze was always calculating. "It's not just speed, it's prediction." You knew exactly where he was going to be. Naruto shrugged, grabbing a waterskin and taking a long drink. "Something like that. You just feel the flow of things. The intent. It's louder than footsteps." He tapped his temple. In his mind, he called it Sage Mode, a connection to the life energy of the world. To the crew, it was just another part of the mystery that was Naruto, Kitsune, Uzumaki. They'd found him 15 years ago, a boy of no more than 17, washed ashore on a nameless Grand Line island. He was unconscious, battered, and radiate an energy so potent and foreign it made even Shanks wary. He spoke of a different world, of shinobi and chakra, of a great war and a final, desperate technique that had torn a hole in reality. He had lost everything: his home, his friends, his future. Shanks, a man who collected strays with immense potential and broken pasts, had seen the unshakable will burning in the boy's eyes and offered him a new home. Naruto had accepted. The sea was endless, a place where no one knew the name Uzumaki or the burden of the nine-tailed fox. Here, he was just Kitsune, the crew's resident enigma, their secret weapon. He wasn't an officer. He didn't command a division. His role was more fluid. When a problem required a ghost, a gale force wind, or an army of one, they sent Naruto. A flash of black and red shot past them. A tiny cannonball of pure energy. Naruto. That was amazing. You went. Poof. And then, bam. Naruto turned, his expression softening instantly. A 7-year-old monkey D. Luffy, all toothy grin and boundless optimism, bounced on the balls of his feet, his eyes sparkling with hero worship. It's just a trick, Luffy, Naruto said, ruffling the boy's messy black hair. Teach me, I wanna go. Poof. Too. Luffy pleaded, tugging on his jacket. You can't. You're made of rubber, remember. Naruto reminded him gently. Besides, you need your own tricks. Something that's all you. Luffy pouted for a second before his face lit up again. Okay. Then I'll come up with a new move. A gum, rocket punch. He stretched his arm back, aiming it at a nearby palm tree. Maybe aim it away from the ship this time, Ben advised dryly, not taking his eyes off the boy. The last time Luffy had tested a new move, he'd nearly taken out their figurehead. Naruto chuckled and walked with Luffy toward the edge of the dock. Away from the others, he sat on the edge, his legs dangling over the clear, blue water. Luffy sat beside him, mimicking the posture. For a few minutes, they Chi watched the gentle waves lap against the pylons. Are you gonna leave soon? Luffy asked, his voice suddenly small. Naruto looked out at the horizon. Yeah, we will. The sea is always calling, you know. I wanna go with you. I know you do, Naruto said. And one day, you'll have your own ship and your own crew. You'll be a captain, and you'll have to be strong enough to protect them. He glanced at Luffy. Being a captain isn't just about being the strongest. It's about being the one everyone can count on, even when they're scared. It's about taking all their dreams on your shoulders and carrying them forward. Luffy's eyes were wide, absorbing every word. He didn't look up to Shanks in the same way. Shanks was a legend, a party animal, a distant, magnificent son. Naruto was closer. He was the cool older brother who was impossibly strong but always had time to talk. I'll be a great captain, Luffy declared, puffing out his chest. The greatest. I'll be king of the pirates. Naruto's smile was genuine. He saw it in the boy. The same unbending will, the same impossible dream. It was a purer version of his own old ambition to be Hokage, unburdened by a village's scorn or a monster sealed in his gut. Yeah, Luffy, he said softly, I think you will be. As the sun climbed higher, the crew's boisterous energy mellowed into a lazy afternoon hum. The sounds of laughter and storytelling drifted from the Red Force. But Naruto was no longer among them. He had slipped away, his footsteps silent, his presence fading from the raucous group until he was just a lone figure walking up the path to the village center. His destination was Party's Bar. The moment he pushed open the swinging doors, the world outside seemed to fall away. The bar wasn't crowded at this hour. A few old fishermen nursed their drinks in a corner. Their conversation a low murmur. The air smelled of polished wood, sweet alcohol, and something clean and floral that was uniquely her. Makino stood behind the bar, her dark green hair tied back neatly, a gentle, welcoming smile on her face as she wiped down a glass. She was the calm at the center of Fuchsia Village's small, predictable world, a quiet harbor in the storm of Naruto's life. When he looked at her, the restlessness of the sea that always churned within him went still. Her smile brightened when she saw him. Naruto, I was wondering when you'd escape them. They're not so bad, he said, sliding onto a stool at the counter. His voice was softer in here, his shoulders more relaxed. Just loud. They're that, she agreed, her eyes twinkling. She placed the clean glass on a shelf and moved with an unhurried grace that he found mesmerizing. She didn't ask what he wanted, she already knew. She pulled a tall glass from the cooler and filled it with chilled water and a slice of lemon. Luffy didn't cause too much trouble today, I hope. No more than usual, Naruto said, taking a sip. It was cool and clean, a perfect contrast to the salty air outside. He's got his sights set on a gum rocket punch. I convinced him to aim it at the jungle instead of the ship. Makino let out a light, musical laugh. It was a sound that could soothe the most frayed of nerves. Thank you for that. I think the mayor would have a fit if he had to bill Captain Shanks for another figurehead. He watched her as she moved, tidying the already immaculate bar. There was a simple, profound beauty in her actions. She wasn't a warrior, a queen, or a navigator of impossible seas. She was a woman who ran a bar in a small, peaceful village, and to Naruto. She was more captivating than any treasure. She saw him not as Kitsune, the red-hair pirate's monster, or as a living calamity with a demon sealed inside him. She saw him, the boy who'd lost his world, now a man trying to find his footing in a new one. He found himself reaching over the counter, taking the rag from her hand. Here, let me. She paused, surprised, but didn't protest. She watched as he wiped down the dark, polished wood of the bar, his movements efficient and precise. He'd done this 100 times before. In the early years, when the ghosts of his past were still screaming in his mind. This bar had been his sanctuary. He would sit here for hours, not speaking, and Makino would simply let him be, her quiet, steady presence a balm on his wounded soul. Over time, the silence had blossomed into conversation. The conversation into a deep, unspoken connection. You don't have to do that, she said softly. I know. He finished wiping the counter and handed the rag back. Their fingers brushed. It was a fleeting touch, barely there, but for Naruto, it felt like a bolt of lightning and a soft blanket all at once. He could feel the warmth of her skin, the steady, calm rhythm of her life force. He pulled his hand back, a faint flush on his cheeks that he hoped she didn't notice. She did. A delicate pink dusted her own cheeks, and she busied herself with rearranging some bottles. The crew seems in high spirits. Quote, we're leaving soon, he said, and the mood shifted. The air in the bar suddenly felt heavier. Makino stopped what she was doing. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable but for the faint sadness in her dark eyes. Oh, I see. A few days, maybe, he continued, his voice low. Shanks feels it, the pull of the Grand Line. And you, she asked, do you feel it too? Naruto looked down at his hands, resting on the cool wood of the bar. Part of me, always. It's the life I chose. It's freedom. He looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers. But it's not the only thing I feel. The unspoken words hung in the air between them. I feel the pull to stay here. With you. They were interrupted by the harsh slam of the tavern doors swinging open. The noise was violent, tearing through the peaceful atmosphere. A group of men, rough and reeking of cheap booze and unwashed bodies, swaggered in. Their leader was a tall, ugly man with a greasy topknot and a cruel sneer. A longsword was strapped to his back. Well, the man sneered, his eyes scanning the room. Look at this dump. Doesn't look like much of a place to party. He stomped over to the bar, his men fanning out behind him. We're mountain bandits. But don't worry, we're not here to tear the place up. We just want some sake. 10 barrels. Naruto's posture hadn't changed, but an icy stillness had fallen over him. His senses, honed by sage mode, flared. He could feel the chaotic, jagged energy of the men, their arrogance, their contempt. More than that, he could feel the spike of fear from the old fisherman in the corner, and the quiet, controlled tension radiating from Makino. Makino, ever the professional, maintained her composure. I'm very sorry, sir, she said, her voice polite but firm. We're actually all out of sake right now. The bandit leader, Higuma, slammed his hand on the counter. A few bottles rattled. What, are you kidding me? Then what are those pirates drinking out there? I'm sorry, she repeated. That was all we had in stock. Higuma's eyes narrowed. He looked around and saw Naruto, sitting alone, a glass of water in front of him. He didn't recognize him as one of the pirates. He just saw a young man in an orange jacket. Before he could say anything, the doors swung open again. This time, it was Shanks, a wide, goofy grin on his face. Sorry about that, Makino. We drank the place dry. Here, this is for the mess. He plunked a small bag of coins on the counter. Then he noticed the bandits. His grin didn't falter. Oh, hello there. Higuma turned, his sneer deepening. So you're the pirates. You look pretty pathetic. He looked down at the bottle of sake Shanks was still holding. I'm a wanted man, 8 million berries. A big shot. Don't mess with me. Shanks just chuckled, scratching the back of his head. Now, let's not get heated. He offered the bottle. Here, you can have this. It's all that's left. Higuma didn't take it. Instead, he drew his sword and, with a single, contemptuous swipe, shattered the bottle. Sake and glass shards sprayed all over Shanks, dripping from his red hair and soaking his shirt. The bar went dead silent. The fisherman looked terrified. Makino gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Naruto's eyes, fixed on the dripping sake on the floor, went cold. Shanks, however, just looked down at the mess. Oh, man, now the floor's all wet. He started to crouch down, grabbing a piece of broken glass. Higuma laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You see that? What a coward. He sheathed his sword. No point wasting time on you losers. Let's go, men. And with that, they swaggered out, laughing and jeering. For a moment, the only sound was Shanks sighing as he picked up glass. Makino rushed over with a cloth. Captain, are you all right? You're soaked. Shanks just laughed. It's nothing. Just some spilled booze. No harm done, right? Luffy, who had followed Shanks in, was shaking. But Captain, why didn't you fight back? They insulted you. You're not a coward. Shanks put his hand on Luffy's head, his straw hat casting a shadow over his eyes. Luffy, it's just a bottle of sake. It's not something worth getting into a fight over. Naruto stood up. The movement was so silent, so fluid, that it drew every eye. He hadn't said a word, but the temperature in the room seemed to have dropped by 20 degrees. He walked over to Shanks, his expression unreadable. Shanks looked up at him, his easygoing demeanor gone. His gaze was sharp, questioning. I'll clean up, Naruto said, his voice flat. He looked at Makino. Are you okay? She just nodded, unable to speak, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else, a deep-seated worry for him. Naruto's gaze flickered to the door the bandits had exited. Shanks, my captain. He said the words formally, a rare occurrence. Permission to take out the trash. The entire Red Hair crew, who had silently filed into the bar behind their captain, looked from Shanks to Naruto. Ben Beckman took a slow drag from his cigarette, his eyes narrowed. Yasoke rested a hand on his pistol. This was a familiar ritual. Naruto didn't ask for permission to fight. He asked for permission to end a problem. Shanks looked at the genuine anger simmering beneath Naruto's placid surface, an anger not for the insult to himself, but for the fear the bandits had brought into this place. Makino's place. He saw the cold fury he only ever showed when his family was threatened. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Don't make a mess, Kitsune. Naruto didn't smile. He simply turned and walked out of the bar. The doors swung shut behind him, leaving a profound silence in his wake. Outside, Higuma and his men were still laughing, their arrogance swelling with their easy victory. Can you believe that pirate? Just let me smash his bottle all over him. They're all talk, boss. Let's go burn their ship. Higuma was about to agree when a voice cut through their laughter, calm and clear. I wouldn't recommend that. They all turned. Naruto was standing in the middle of the path, about 20 feet away, his hands in his pockets. He looked completely non-threatening. Higuma spat on the ground. And who the hell are you? The pirate's cabin boy. I'm the guy who's disappointed in you, Naruto said, his voice carrying an odd weight. You walk into a place of peace. You terrorize old men. You frighten a woman who has shown you nothing but kindness. And for what? For a bit of pride. For some spilled sake. Higuma's face contorted in rage. You, talking big for someone who's about to die. Men, kill him. His 20-odd bandits drew their blades and charged, a chaotic wave of steel and shouting. Naruto didn't move. He simply brought his hands together in a single, simple seal. Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. With a series of soft puffs that sounded like popping corks, the space around Naruto filled with identical copies of himself. In a single second, one man had become 50. The charging bandits skidded to a halt, their eyes wide with disbelief and terror. They were surrounded. What is this? Higuma stammered, his bravado evaporating. Some kind of devil fruit. Quote, something like that, one of the clones said, grinning. The Naruto clones moved as one. It wasn't a fight, it was a process. A systematic dismantling. There were no flashy techniques. No grand explosions. One clone would disarm a man, another would deliver a precise chop to the back of his neck. They moved through the bandits like a river flowing around rocks, with an efficiency that was both beautiful and terrifying. Within 30 seconds, every single bandit was on the ground, unconscious. Not a single drop of blood had been spilled. Only Higuma was left, standing in a field of his sleeping men, his sword held in a trembling hand. He stared at Naruto, who now stood alone again, the clones having vanished as quickly as they appeared. You're a monster, Higuma whispered. Taking a step back. No, Naruto said, and for the first time, he took a step forward. I'm just a guy who really hates bullies. In a desperate, fear-fueled rage, Higuma lunged. His sword aimed at Naruto's heart. Naruto didn't even bother to dodge. His hand came up, not to block the blade, but to meet it. His palm was open, relaxed. A faint, almost invisible, spiral of blue energy shimmered around his hand. The tip of Higuma's sword touched his palm and simply stopped. It was as if it had hit a wall of solid, unyielding force. Higuma's eyes bulged. He pushed, but the blade wouldn't budge. Naruto's eyes were filled with a profound sadness. Is this really what you're willing to die for? He pushed his hand forward, a gentle motion. It wasn't a punch. It was a press. The small, contained energy in his palm discharged into Higuma's chest. There was no sound, no explosion. Higuma's eyes rolled back into his head, and he collapsed, his fall cushioned by one of his unconscious subordinates. Silence. The doors to the bar opened. Shanks and the crew stepped out, looking at the peaceful scene of sleeping bandits. I told you not to make a mess, Shanks said, a wide grin breaking across his face. I didn't, Naruto replied, dusting off his hands. They're just sleeping. He glanced back at the bar, where Makino was standing in the doorway, her hand still over her mouth. Their eyes met across the distance. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. It's over. Her relief was a palpable wave he could feel even from here, washing over him, dousing the last embers of his anger. A few days later, the inevitable arrived. The Red Force was fully supplied, its sails restless in the morning breeze. The entire village had turned out to see them off, a mix of sadness and festival-like excitement. The most famous departure was already underway. Shanks stood before a crying Luffy, holding his straw hat. You're really not taking me? Luffy wailed, tears streaming down his face. Shanks grinned. You're still too small. But, since you're going to be a great pirate one day, he placed the hat firmly on Luffy's head. I'm leaving this hat with you. It's my treasure. Take good care of it. And bring it back to me someday, when you've become a great pirate. Luffy's cries hitched. He clutched the brim of the oversized hat, his small body shaking with the weight of the promise. Naruto watched from the deck of the ship, leaning against the railing next to Ben Beckman. He's got the will, Ben said, lighting a new cigarette. The same kind as the captain. The same kind as Roger. He's got something more, Naruto said, his gaze fixed on the boy. He doesn't have the ghosts. He's starting fresh. He knew what it was to carry the weight of a past you didn't choose. Luffy was pure, unbridled will. It was something to be cherished. As the crew began to cast off the lines, Naruto slipped over the side of the ship, landing silently on the dock. The others knew to give him a moment. He walked not toward the crowd, but around the back of Party's bar, to a small, private garden where Makino tended to her herbs and flowers. She was there, waiting for him, a small travel pack of food and water in her hands. For the journey, she said, her voice quiet. Thank you. He took it, their hands brushing again. This time, neither of them pulled away immediately. The silence between them was thick with everything they couldn't, or wouldn't, say. The years of quiet companionship, the shared moments, the fear, the relief. Be careful, Naruto, she said, finally breaking the quiet. Her voice was barely a whisper. He looked at her, at the genuine worry etched on her beautiful face. He wanted to tell her everything. That he would tear the world apart to come back to her. That she was the only peace he'd ever known. That he loved her. But the words were too heavy, too dangerous. He was a pirate. A man with a monster in his soul and enemies he hadn't even met yet. To declare his love would be to paint a target on her back. So, Instead, he showed her. He held out his palm. Focusing, he gathered the latent life energy from the air around him, the very essence of Sage Mode. A soft, green light glowed in his hand. He mixed it with his own chakra, a piece of his own life force. The light coalesced, solidified, and from it, a tiny, perfect sapling sprouted. Its leaves unfurling in his palm. It was no taller than his finger, but it pulsed with a vibrant, unquenchable life. He gently placed it in a small, empty pot on her workbench. "It's a piece of me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "As long as it's alive, you'll know I'm okay. It won't need water or sun. It'll draw life from the world itself. It won't die." Makino stared at the tiny, glowing tree, tears welling in her eyes. She reached out, her fingers hovering over a leaf but not daring to touch it. It was the most beautiful, heartfelt promise she had ever received. It was a promise to return. "I know," she whispered, finally looking up at him. He stepped closer, his gaze locked on hers. He lifted a hand, gently wiping a tear from her cheek with his thumb. For a breathless moment, he leaned in, his resolve warring with his heart. He could close the distance, claim the kiss that they both so clearly wanted. But the ship's horn blew in the distance, a mournful call. The moment was broken. He pulled back, his hand dropping to his side. "I have to go." "I know," she said again, her voice stronger this time, filled with a resolve that mirrored his own. Without another word, he turned and walked away. Not looking back, he couldn't. If he looked back, he might not be able to leave. Hours later, the red force was a speck on the horizon. Fuchsia Village long since disappeared. The party on the ship was in full swing, celebrating the beginning of a new adventure. But Naruto wasn't celebrating. He stood at the prow, the wind whipping through his blonde hair, his eyes on the endless blue expanse. The piece of him that he'd left behind ached, a phantom limb. But it was also an anchor, a promise, a reason to survive. He felt at peace. For the first time in a long time, he knew exactly what he was fighting for. That night, as he slept in his hammock, rocked by the gentle motion of the sea, the peace was shattered. He wasn't in the ship. He was floating in a void of blinding, sterile white. There was no sound, no smell, no feeling. Below him, a shape began to form. It was a perfect, black octahedron, smooth and featureless, radiating a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. It felt like the absence of everything, of life, of chaos, of emotion. A voice echoed in the white space, not with sound, but as a direct impression on his consciousness. It was ancient, patient, and utterly devoid of passion. Anomaly detected. Aberration of origin. The ninth chaos, a flaw in the blueprint, must be corrected, deconstructed, purified. Naruto was jolted awake, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was back in his hammock, the familiar sounds of the creaking ship and his snoring crewmates filling the air. He was covered in a cold sweat. He sat up, his hand instinctively going to his stomach, where Kurama was stirring restlessly. What was that, Kurama? He sent to his partner. The great fox's voice rumbled in his mind, laced with a rare thread of uncertainty. "I do not know." It felt like the opposite of life. Like a will of perfect, silent nothingness. "It was looking at us. At you." Naruto swung his legs out of the hammock and walked to the deck. He stared out at the moonlit water, the nightmare clinging to him like a shroud. The feeling of being scrutinized, of being labeled an error, a flaw in some grand, cosmic design, chilled him to the bone. The world was vast, and he had a new home. A new family. He had a promise to keep, a glowing sapling in a small village garden. But for the first time since coming to this world, he felt a new, unfamiliar sensation. He felt hunted. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Silent King of Sinod. Weeks bled into months, the red force slicing through the Grand Line's tumultuous waters like a splinter of night. The memory of Fuchsia Village, of Makino's quiet strength and the vibrant green of the sapling he'd left her, was a constant, warm hum beneath the surface of Naruto's consciousness. It was his private anchor in the endless blue. The nightmare of the sterile white void and the cold, judging voice had not returned, but the feeling it left behind lingered, a subtle, persistent chill, like a draft from a door he couldn't find. They were sailing toward Sinod, the island of summits. It was a place unlike any other they frequented. There were no raucous port towns, no rowdy bars overflowing with pirates and bounty hunters. Sinod was an island of pristine white marble, manicured gardens, and air that felt thick with whispered secrets. It was the Grand Line's unofficial capital of diplomacy, a neutral ground where kings, queens, and even world government officials could meet without the immediate threat of cannon fire. Its neutrality was its lifeblood, guaranteed by generations of shrewd rulers and the unspoken agreement of the world's major powers that such a place was simply too useful to conquer. Recently, however, that unspoken agreement had started to fray. The world government, growing ever more bold and centralized in its authority, was applying pressure. Not with warships, but with ink and veiled threats, trade embargoes, withdrawn protections, and the insidious suggestion that Sinod's neutrality was beginning to look a lot like complicity with pirates. The Red Hair pirates were not here to negotiate. They were here as a statement. The presence of a Yonko's flag in the harbor was a more potent deterrent than any treaty. It was Shank's way of saying, "This place is free. Keep it that way." Naruto was perched atop the highest minaret of Sinod's Grand Palace, a position he had taken hours ago. From here, he could see the entire city, a breathtaking panorama of white and gold under the afternoon sun. The crew was below, dispersed. Shanks and Ben were at the docks, a visible, casual threat. Yasop was somewhere in the tiered gardens, a ghost with a rifle. The rest of the crew were enjoying a rare shore leave in the designated visitors' quarter, their boisterous presence a deliberate disruption to Sinod's starched collar atmosphere. Naruto, as always, had the lonely watch. He sat cross-legged, his eyes closed, his orange jacket a stark slash of color against the pale stone. He wasn't watching, he was feeling. With Sage Mode active, the world wasn't a collection of sights and sounds, but a symphony of life energy. He could feel the anxious thrum of the palace guards, ire discipline a thin veneer over their fear of the pirates in their harbor. He could feel the arrogant, self-assured pulses of the world government delegation as they strode through the halls below. And he could feel the king. King Alistair of Sinod was a powerful, steady beacon in the center of the palace. His life force was calm, deep, and resolute, the energy of a man who believed in his ideals and was willing to stand by them. He was the reason they were here. He was a reformist, a believer in true neutrality, and he had refused to bow to the world government's pressure. Naruto let his senses expand, sweeping over the palace, cataloging every guard, every servant, every diplomat. It was a complex tapestry of life, interwoven and vibrant. But then he felt it. It was a hole, a pinprick at first, on the outer wall of the palace. A spot of utter, absolute nothing. It wasn't the feeling of death, which was a sudden cessation of life, an echo. This was different. This was a patch of reality where life energy had never been. A void. It was cold, silent, and utterly alien. It was the same feeling from his nightmare, distilled into a single, moving point. The hole began to move, sliding up the palace wall with an unnatural smoothness, entering through a high window. Naruto's eyes snapped open. The calm vanished, replaced by razor-sharp focus. Assassin. He didn't hesitate. He brought 2 fingers to his lips and whistled. A short, sharp bird call that was their signal for imminent, high-level threat. On a balcony miles away, Yasop would have heard it and would now be looking for a target. But Naruto knew this wasn't a target Yasop could handle. He pressed his hand to the stone floor. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, a perfect copy of himself puffed into existence beside him. Without a word, the clone nodded, leapt from the minaret, and disappeared into the labyrinthine alleys of the city, its destination the docks. It would deliver the warning to Ben and Shanks. The real Naruto turned his attention back to the palace. The void was moving through the upper corridors now, heading directly for the king's location, the Grand Solar, where he was in a heated, closed-door meeting with the world government envoys. Naruto flowed over the edge of the minaret, his boots finding purchase on the ornate carvings of the palace wall. He moved downwards like a spider, his movements silent and swift. A shadow against the sun-bleached stone. He slipped through an open archway into a long, tapestry-lined corridor, the air cool and still. The void was close now, just around the corner. He flattened himself against the wall, slowing his breathing, suppressing his own life's signature until he was just another shadow. He peeked around the corner. The corridor was empty, Yet the void was there. He could feel it passing him. And then he saw it. It wasn't a person, but a distortion in the air, a shimmering patch of space about 6 feet tall that seemed to swallow the light. As it passed a gilded suit of armor, the polished metal seemed to dull and warp, the reflection bending incorrectly. A guard patrol of 2 men came around the far end of the hallway, their footsteps echoing on the marble. They saw the distortion and froze, their hands flying to their swords. One of them opened his mouth to shout a warning. No sound came out. His mouth moved, his face contorted in a silent scream. But the air swallowed the noise completely. The other guard, panicking, drew his flintlock pistol and fired. There was a flash from the pan, a puff of smoke, but the thunderous crack of the gunshot was absent. The lead ball flew towards the shimmer and then simply stopped, a foot away from it, hanging in the air for a second before dropping to the floor with a silent clink. The shimmer passed over them. The 2 guards didn't scream or fall. They just stopped. Their life forces, which had been flaring with panic, were extinguished. They remained standing for a moment, their eyes vacant, before slumping to the ground like puppets with their strings cut. Naruto felt a cold dread creep up his spine. This wasn't a devil fruit he recognized. This was something else, something clean and terrifyingly efficient. He didn't have time to analyze. The void was moving again, faster now, beelining for the solar. Naruto broke from the shadows and gave chase, his soft-soled boots making no sound. He entered the area the shimmer had passed through, and the world changed. The ambient hum of life he was used to feeling through Sage Mode was gone, replaced by a thick, muffling silence in his senses. It was like trying to see through a dense fog. His primary advantage, his precognitive sensory ability, was crippled. But his own energy, his chakra, was unaffected. It still burned within him, a furnace of life in a dead zone. He rounded another corner just in time to see the shimmering distortion coalesce. The air warped and twisted, and a figure resolved from the nothingness, as if being painted into existence. It was a man, tall and lean, dressed in the severe white uniform of a cipher pole agent, but the fit was too perfect, the creases too sharp, as if the clothes were made of folded paper. His hair was silver, slicked back with an unnatural precision. His face was handsome in a severe, geometric way, utterly devoid of emotion. His eyes were the palest gray, like a winter sky. This was Praetor Kalis. He stood before the grand, oak doors of the Royal Solar. 2 royal guards, the king's personal protectors, elite warriors, stood before them. They raised their halberds. Halt! None may pass. One commanded. Kalis didn't speak. He simply raised a hand. The air around the guards began to shimmer, the null zone expanding to encompass them. They charged, their movements becoming sluggish, their powerful hockey-infused strikes turning into clumsy swings. Kalis stepped between them with an inhuman grace, his hands moving in a blur. He didn't strike them. He simply placed his open palms on their chests. The guards froze, their armor beginning to flake away into geometric patterns of light. Their bodies followed, deconstructing into silent, glittering motes. In seconds, they were gone. Not dead, erased. Kalis turned his attention to the doors. He placed a hand on the thick wood, and it began to dissolve, breaking down into a cascade of silent, crystalline dust. Naruto knew he was out of time. He burst from the hallway, no longer caring about stealth. Kalis's head snapped towards him, his movement unnervingly fast. His pale gray eyes registered Naruto, and for the first time, a flicker of something crossed his face. Not surprise, not anger. It was recognition, and a kind of detached, scientific curiosity. The anomaly, Kalis said. His voice was a monotone, perfectly modulated, without inflection or emotion. It was the voice Naruto had heard in his dream. Aberration of origin, the chaotic variable from a failed world. The doors behind him finished dissolving, revealing the scene within. King Alistair stood by a large map table, his face pale but resolute. The 2 world government envoys were cowering behind a large chair, their arrogant facades shattered. My orders are to correct the political variable of this island by removing its king, Kalis stated, as if discussing a mathematical equation. You are an unscheduled complication. Your orders are cancelled, Naruto said, his body tensing. He could feel the null zone around Kalis, a dead space that would likely dampen any conventional attack. But he wasn't conventional. He flashed through a series of hand signs. Inhaling deeply. Futon. Datapa. He exhaled a hurricane-force gust of wind, not as a physical attack, but to clear the air, to disrupt the shimmer. The corridor howled. Tapestries were ripped from the walls and vases shattered. The wind slammed into Kalis, but it seemed to part around his null zone, which held firm like a rock in a river. The force, however, did push him back a step. His perfect composure momentarily disturbed. Kalis's eyes narrowed slightly. Elemental chaos. Inefficient. Your energy signature is foreign. It is not of the sea, nor of the spirit. Good, Naruto said, a feral grin touching his lips. That means it's something you don't know how to break. He charged. Kalis met him, not with a charge of his own, but by simply expanding his null zone. As Naruto entered it, the roar of the wind in his ears vanished. The world went utterly silent. The feeling of his sage mode was choked off almost completely. He felt alone, isolated. It was a potent psychological weapon. But Naruto had spent the first 12 years of his life utterly alone. This was nothing. He feinted with a right punch, drawing Kalis's attention. The praetor moved to parry. His movements economical and precise. But Naruto's punch was a diversion. His left hand was already forming a swirling, crackling sphere of pure blue energy. The Rasengan. The moment the sphere formed, Kalis's composure finally broke. His gray eyes widened in genuine shock. He could feel it, even if his power couldn't dampen it. It was a concentration of raw, untamed energy unlike anything he had ever encountered. It was pure chaos, given form. Impossible, he breathed, the sound inaudible in his own silent world. He tried to bring his other hand up, to form a nullifying shield, but Naruto was too fast. With a guttural roar that no one could hear, Naruto slammed the Rasengan into Kalis's chest. There was no sound, but the impact was devastating. The silent world of the null zone shattered like glass. Sound rushed back in, the terrified gasps of the envoys, the king's sharp intake of breath. Kalis was thrown backward, not with the concussive force of a normal blow, but as if he'd been hit by a grinder. The Rasengan wasn't just pushing him, it was tearing at the very fabric of his being, the chaotic rotation of the chakra at war with his sterile, ordered existence. He flew through the doorway and slammed into the far wall of the solar, the marble cracking around him. He slid to the floor, his perfect white uniform torn, his chest scorched by a swirling black pattern. He wasn't bleeding. Instead, faint, geometric lines of light were leaking from the wound. Naruto stood panting in the ruined doorway, the Rasengan fading from his hand. He had won, but the cost had been high. The concentration needed to maintain the technique inside the null zone had drained him more than he expected. Kalis looked up, his body flickering like a faulty projection. His face was still a mask of calm. But his eyes held a new light. It was the look of a scientist who had just discovered a terrifying, beautiful new law of physics. The architect's blueprint is divine law, he said, his voice glitching. Skipping octaves. All flaws, all chaos, must be purified. Your existence is the ultimate heresy. The architect will unmake you. He will correct. His body began to dissolve. Not into dust, but into pure, white light, breaking apart into countless, perfect geometric shapes. Triangles, squares, octahedrons. They swirled in the air for a moment, a silent blizzard of geometry, and then vanished. Naruto rushed forward, but there was nothing to grab. The light was gone. Kalis was gone. Where he had been lying, a single object remained on the cracked marble floor. It was a perfect, black octahedron, about the size of his fist. It was smooth, flawless, and absorbed the light, casting no reflection. Naruto knelt, his senses on high alert. He could still feel it, the concentrated essence of the void, the cold, dead nothingness. He hesitated, then wrapped his hand in the sleeve of his jacket and carefully picked it up. It was cold to the touch, a deep, unnatural cold tea. Hat seemed to suck the warmth from his body. The king, Alistair, finally found his voice. By the seas, what was that thing? Naruto stood up, turning to face him. Trouble, he said, his voice grim. He looked at the cowering world government envoys. And I think your meeting is over. By the time Shanks and Ben Beckman arrived, the palace was in a controlled state of chaos. Royal guards were securing the area, and the trembling envoys were being escorted away. Shanks took one look at the dissolved doorway, the cracked wall, and Naruto standing there, holding the strange black object, and his usual easy-going smile vanished. "Kitsune," he said, his voice low and serious. "Report." They convened in a private chamber, away from prying eyes. Naruto recounted everything, the void in his senses, the silent, deconstructing power, the Praetor's unnatural physiology, and his final, cryptic words. He placed the obsidian octahedron on the table between them. Ben Beckman, who had been listening with rapt attention, his cigarette burned down to the filter, leaned forward. He didn't touch the object. He just stared at it, his sharp eyes missing nothing. "Praetor," he murmured, the name tasting strange on his tongue. "That's an old title. Pre-imperial." He looked at Naruto. "He mentioned an architect and a blueprint." Naruto nodded. "And he called me an aberration. Said I was from a failed world." Ben's gaze sharpened. "He knows where you came from. Or at least, that you came from somewhere else. That's information no one should have." He finally looked at the octahedron, a flicker of grim recognition in his eyes. "This symbol, this perfect geometry. I've seen it before, not like this. As a sketch, a footnote in a text I acquired from a certain scholar in Ohara, years before the Buster Call." Shanks looked at his first mate. "Ben." It was a redacted copy of a void century manuscript, Ben said, his voice barely above a whisper. Most of it was nonsense, deleted passages and blacked out lines. But there was a recurring motif in the margins. A symbol of divine order and cosmic correction. The group associated with it was referred to as the Purifiers. Their Mond 8 was outlined in something called the Seraphim's Decree. He finally met Shanks' eyes, the gravity of the situation settling in the room like a shroud. According to the text, they were a fanatical sect who served a being they believed was the world's true creator. An architect. Their goal wasn't conquest or control in the way the world government understands it. It was sanitation. They believed the world, with its emotions, its chaos, its freedom, its will of D, was a flawed creation. A failed experiment, and they were tasked with sterilizing it, preparing it for a complete rebuild. Silence filled the room. The implications were staggering. This wasn't a rival crew. This wasn't the Marines or the world government seeking to impose their brand of justice. This was something ancient, something fundamentalist, something that saw their very existence, the vibrant, chaotic, free world they sailed, as a disease to be cured. Shanks, who had been silent, finally spoke. He reached out and picked up the octahedron, his hand bare. An icy frost instantly spider-webbed across his skin from the point of contact, but he didn't flinch. His conqueror's haki flared, a silent, invisible shockwave of pure willpower that slammed against the object's dead energy. The octahedron didn't break, but the cold radiating from it lessened, subdued by the force of his spirit. "So," Shanks said, his voice dangerously calm, his eyes like chips of flint, "a new god wants to play king of the world." He closed his fist around the object, his knuckles white. "He's going to find out we don't kneel." Naruto looked at the cold, dead object in his captain's hand. Then he thought of the small, living sapling in a garden halfway across the world, pulsing with a gentle, green light. The contrast was absolute. It was the difference between a perfect, silent tomb and a messy, vibrant, living world. The battle lines had just been drawn, and he was standing right on the frontier. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Duel of the Unyielding Wills. The air over Karaigana Island was perpetually cold and damp, clinging to the skin like a wet shroud. Skeletal trees clawed at a bruised, twilight sky, and the ruins of a forgotten kingdom cast long, jagged shadows across the landscape. In the center of this gothic gloom stood a castle, a towering silhouette of dark stone and foreboding spires that seemed to have been carved from the island's very despair. It was the home of Dracul, Hawk Eyes, Mahawk, the world's greatest swordsman, and the Red Force was anchored in a secluded, black-sanded cove at its base. The visit was not for business or pleasure in the conventional sense. It was a pilgrimage of sorts, a meeting of titans. Shanks and Mahawk were rivals of a legendary caliber, their past duels rumored to have hacken the very foundations of the Grand Line. Now, with Shanks and Yonko, their relationship had evolved into one of deep, grudging respect. They were two kings of different domains, meeting on neutral ground to test the state of the world. And each other. For most of the crew, this meant a tense shore leave. They stayed close to the ship, their usual boisterous energy tempered by the oppressive atmosphere of the island. Lucky Roo complained about the lack of quality game, and Yasop claimed the constant gloom was throwing off his aim. Only Shanks seemed at ease, currently seated across a grand, polished table from Mihawk in the castle's cavernous great hall, a flagon of wine in his hand and a grin on his face. Naruto was not with them. He was standing on a mist-shrouded plateau a mile from the castle. A windswept expanse of cracked stone overlooking a churning, gray sea. The air here was even colder, the wind a sharp, biting thing that smelled of brine and decay. But Naruto didn't seem to notice. He stood with his back to the path, his eyes closed, his senses extended. He wasn't just feeling for threats. He was listening to the island itself. It was a place of immense sorrow, steep, ed in the echoes of a war that had scoured it clean of joy. He could feel the ghosts of it, the lingering pain etched into the very rock. It was a lonely place. A fitting home for a man like Mihawk. A crunch of boots on gravel announced an arrival. Naruto didn't turn. He knew that walk. It was precise, deliberate, each step placed with the economy of a master swordsman. Your senses are remarkable. Mihawk's voice cut through the whistling wind. It was a deep, resonant baritone, as sharp and clear as the edge of a blade. Even my own observation hockey struggles to pinpoint a man who can so Thor. Owly blend with the ambient life of a place. Naruto opened his eyes, the vibrant blue a startling contrast to the monochromatic landscape. He turned to face the swordsman. Mihawk was an imposing figure, his long black coat billowing around him like the wings of a great bird of prey. The massive, cross-shaped hilt of his black blade, Yuru, rose above his shoulder. His eyes, the color of molten gold and ringed with black, were what truly commanded attention. They were the eyes of a predator, holding an unnerving stillness and a piercing, analytical intelligence. It's not about hiding, Naruto replied, his voice calm. It's about listening. This island has a sad story. It's loud, if you know how to hear it. Mihawk's expression didn't change, but a flicker of interest sparked in those hawk-like eyes. A poet's soul in a pirate's body. You are a collection of contradictions, Kitsune. He took a few steps closer, his gaze sweeping over Naruto. Shanks speaks of you as his hidden ace. A force of nature unbound by the common rules of this world. He claims your will is a thing of pure, untamed chaos. The captain exaggerates, Naruto said with a slight shrug. Does he? Mihawk's hand went to the hilt of his blade. The simple movement was charged with an incredible weight. The air itself seemed to grow heavy, tense with anticipation. I have not drawn my sword against Shanks in years. My blade grows restless for a worthy challenge. His spirit is a roaring inferno. Yours is a silent, swirling storm. I wish to see it. I wish to feel its edge. It wasn't a request. It was a demand, the highest form of compliment one warrior could pay another. It was an invitation to a dance at the highest level of combat. Naruto felt a thrill, a pure, unadulterated jolt of excitement he hadn't felt since his spars with the legends of his own world. This wasn't about anger or protecting someone. This was a test, a conversation spoken in the language of steel and energy. A slow, predatory grin spread across Naruto's face, mirroring the intensity in Mihawk's eyes. All right, Hawk eyes, but don't blame me if you chip your sword. The grin was Mihawk's only answer. With a movement so fluid, it seemed to defy the friction of the world, he drew Yuru. The black blade seemed to drink the meager light from the sky, its edge a line of absolute sharpness that promised oblivion. The simple act of unsheathing it sent a tremor of pure power through the air, a pressure that would have brought a lesser man to his knees. Naruto felt the pressure as a physical force, but he stood his ground, his feet planted firmly. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply fell into a low, relaxed fighting stance, his hands open. You face the world's greatest swordsman with empty hands. Mihawk noted, his tone flat. I don't need a sword. Naruto replied. I am the blade. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind. Then, Mihawk moved. He didn't charge. He simply wasn't there anymore. He appeared directly in front of Naruto. Yuru descending in a graceful, lethal arc. It wasn't a test swing. It was a strike meant to end the duel before it began, a perfect slash that carried the full weight of his title. To a normal eye, Naruto would have simply been cut in two. But to Mihawk's supreme observation haki, he witnessed something impossible. Just before the blade connected, Naruto's form seemed to flicker. His body shifting a mere inch to the right, his movements preternaturally fluid. The edge of Yuru, a blade that could cleave mountains, hissed through the air, slicing through a few strands of blonde hair and the fabric of his jacket. But missing his flesh entirely. Naruto's hand shot up, palm open, aimed not at Mihawk, but at the ground beside him. A swirling sphere of blue chakra, a Rasengan, materialized in his hand in an instant. He slammed it into the stone plateau. The impact was immense, but contained. The ground beneath Mihawk's feet erupted, not in a chaotic explosion, but in a focused, grinding blast that tore a perfect crater in the rock. The swordsman was thrown off balance, forced to leap back to avoid the unstable ground, his attack broken. He landed lightly a dozen yards away, his golden eyes narrowed. Impressive. You dodged not where I was swinging, but where my haki told me you would be. You were reacting to my intent itself. I told you, Naruto said, his body now humming with energy. I listen. He clapped his hands together. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. In a flurry of 50 identical puffs of smoke, the plateau was suddenly filled with orange jackets. The Naruto clones fanned out, surrounding Mihawk from all sides, each one falling into the same relaxed fighting stance. Mihawk's lips curved into the barest hint of a smile. An army. How crude. And how wonderful. He didn't wait. He became a whirlwind of black and steel. The clones charged, and the duel began in earnest. It was a terrifyingly fast dance of death. Yuru moved in arcs of pure destruction, each swing a definitive statement. A single touch from the black blade and a clone would dissolve into a puff of smoke. But for every one Mihawk dispatched, two more would take its place, their attacks relentless and unpredictable. They came at him with everything. Some threw punches and kicks, their movements enhanced with chakra to give them bone-shattering force. Others formed Rasengans, the loose spheres of chaotic energy forcing Mihawk to dodge and weave, their impacts gouging new craters in the stone battlefield. It was a storm of fists and energy, a relentless assault designed to overwhelm and exhaust. But Mihawk was not just any opponent. He was a fortress. His defense was absolute, his movements a perfect economy of motion. He never took a single wasted step. His observation haki was a flawless shield, allowing him to see moments into the future, to predict the trajectory of every punch, every kick, every swirling Rasengan. He moved through the sea of clones like a shark through a school of fish, untouchable. Inevitable. Yuru was an extension of his will, a black crescent of death that erased every clone it touched. The original Naruto stood at the edge of the plateau, his eyes closed again. He was the conductor of this chaotic orchestra, feeding information to his clones, coordinating their attacks, searching for an opening, a single flaw in Mihawk's perfect defense. He could feel the sheer, overwhelming power of the swordsman's spirit, a solitary, unshakable mountain of will. It was magnificent. After several minutes of this relentless assault, Mihawk came to a stop in the center of a circle of clones, the ground around him littered with the fading remnants of smoke. He hadn't broken a sweat. Is this the extent of your storm? He asked, his voice echoing over the wind. A deluge of quantity. I expected more, Kitsune. The clones all grinned in unison. The storm is just getting started, they said as one. The real Naruto's eyes snapped open. He had found it. Not a flaw, but a pattern. Mihawk's defense was perfect, but it was reactive. He met each threat as it came. He didn't initiate. He was a perfect counter-puncher. Naruto decided to stop punching. All at once, the 50 clones stopped attacking. They stood their ground, and every single one of them began forming a Rasengan. The air on the plateau thrummed with the sound of 50 swirling spheres of chakra, a high-pitched, harmonic shriek that vibrated in the bone. Mihawk's eyes widened slightly. He could feel the astronomical amount of energy being gathered. An attack on this scale would vaporize the entire plateau. It was suicidal, but they didn't attack him. Now, the original Naruto roared. In perfect unison, the clones turned and slammed their Rasengans into the ground around Mihawk, forming a perfect circle of grinding destruction. The plateau groaned, the stone cracking and shattering under the focused assault. The entire section of the cliff face where Mihawk was standing, a massive disk of rock 100 feet in diameter, broke free from the island. With a deafening roar, the stone platform tilted and began to fall into the churning sea hundreds of feet below. Mihawk was on a falling island. His footing gone, his perfect stance broken. It was a brilliant, insane tactic. For a split second, as gravity took hold, Mihawk was vulnerable. And in that second, the real Naruto struck. He shot forward like a golden arrow, his body coated in a shimmering, translucent film of chakra. He crossed the distance in the blink of an eye, appearing above the falling swordsman. And his hand was a Rasengan larger and more violent than any of the others, crackling with raw, uncontained power. Mihawk, now in midair, was a master even in chaos. He angled his body, twisting to meet the threat. He brought Yuru up, not to slash, but to block, holding the massive blade flat. Good, his voice boomed over the roar of the wind and crashing waves. The Rasengan slammed into the flat of Yuru. The impact was apocalyptic. A shockwave of incandescent power erupted from the point of contact, a silent, expanding dome of force that vaporized the falling rock platform and flash-boiled the surface of the sea below into a mushroom cloud of steam. The sound came a moment later, a deafening crack boom that was heard all the way back at the castle, rattling the wine glasses in Shanks and Mihawk's hands. Shanks paused, the flagon halfway to his lips. He looked towards the window, a slow, wide grin spreading across his face. "Ah," he said, "the kids are playing." Back on the cliff, Naruto was thrown back by the force of his own attack, landing hard on the newly formed edge of the precipice. Mihawk was blown in the opposite direction, sent tumbling through the air before he righted himself and landed gracefully on a lower, jutting crag of rock, his coat billowing. The duel was not over. Naruto pushed himself to his feet, his breathing ragged. That had taken more out of him than he liked. He looked across the new chasm at Mihawk. The swordsman was unscathed, but his stance was different now. More alert, more excited. To use the battlefield itself as a weapon, Mihawk mused, his voice carrying easily across the gap. A strategist's mind, not just a brawler's. But that power, it is not enough. You hold back. You fight with the strength of a storm, but I can feel the hurricane locked inside you. Unleash it. Show me the will that Shanks respects. Show me the monster. Naruto's eyes hardened. He knew what Mihawk was asking for. He wanted to see Kurama's power. The raw, divine energy that he had kept sealed away, used only in flashes, never fully embraced in this world. It was his final defense, the power he reserved for protecting his family. But this was different. This was a demand from an equal. To refuse would be an insult. To refuse would be to admit he was not on this man's level. "Kurama," he sent into his mind. "You feel like stretching your legs." A low, rumbling chuckle echoed in his consciousness, a sound like grinding consonants. "It has been a long time since we have faced a worthy opponent, Naruto. This one's spirit is sharp. It will be a fine stone on which to hone our claws." Naruto closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were no longer blue. They were a burning, blood red, with slitted pupils. His whisker marks darkened, became more pronounced. A torrent of incandescent, orange chakra erupted from him, swirling around his body like a miniature sun. It was no longer the calm, natural energy of Sage Mode. This was raw, violent, and ancient. It was the power of a tailed beast. He didn't transform. He didn't need to. He coated his arms and legs in the thick, bubbling chakra, forming ethereal claws of energy at his fingertips. The air around him shimmered with heat, and the very ground at his feet began to crackle and glow. Across the chasm, Mihawk's eyes widened. He could feel it, a will as old as the world, a power that was not born of this sea. It was a primal, cataclysmic force. The world's greatest swordsman threw back his head and laughed. It was not a sound of mirth, but of pure, unadulterated joy. The joy of a predator who has finally found a worthy hunt. "Yes," he roared, his voice filled with exhilaration. "This is it. This is the will I wanted to see." He raised Yuru, and a visible, emerald green aura of haki erupted around the blade. An energy so dense it seemed to warp the air. This was no longer a spar. This was a battle between two forces of nature. Naruto crouched, the orange chakra flaring. Mahak mirrored him, his blade held ready. In the same instant, they launched themselves across the chasm. They met in the dead center of the gap, suspended in the air over the raging sea. Claw met blade. The sound was not the clash of metal. It was the shriek of reality tearing. The orange energy of Kurama's chakra ground against the peerless haki of Yuru's edge. Sparks of green and orange fire flew in every direction. They were locked, a stalemate of two absolute forces. Naruto's slitted eyes stared into Mahak's golden ones. They were no longer fighting with techniques. They were fighting with pure will, pouring their very spirits into the point of contact. Your will is magnificent, Mahak grunted, the muscles in his arms straining. A raging, untamed fire. Yours isn't so bad either, Naruto growled back, pushing harder. Sharp, unbending, lonely. They pushed off, flipping back through the air and landing on opposite sides of the chasm once more. They stood panting, the energy of their clash still crackling in the air between them. The plateau was a ruin. The sea below was a boiling cauldron. The sky above seemed bruised and broken. They had reached an impasse. Naruto could feel the strain of maintaining the chakra cloak. Mahak, for all his power, could not find a way to breach the raw, defensive energy of the Nine Tails. They could fight for days and the result would be the saw. Mutual annihilation or mutual exhaustion. Slowly, Naruto let the orange chakra recede. His eyes faded back to blue, the power retracting back into its seal. He was breathing heavily, his body aching, but a wide, tired grin was on his face. Across the gap, Mahak slowly, deliberately, sheathed Yuru. The sound of the blade clicking into place was like a final verdict. The duel was over. It was a draw. Your will, Mahak said, his voice holding a new, profound level of respect, is as unyielding as any blade I have ever faced. You have earned my esteem, Naruto Uzumaki. It was the first time Mahak had ever used his given name. Later that evening, the storm outside the castle raged, but inside the great hall, a fire roared in the hearth. The three of them, Shanks, Mahak, and Naruto, sat around the massive table. Naruto, his aches soothed by a bottle of Mahak's finest vintage, felt a comfortable exhaustion settle into his bones. A draw with hawk eyes in your first real duel, Shanks said, clapping Naruto on the back with enough force to make him spill his wine. I knew you had it in you. Ha ha ha. Mahak, sipping his own wine from a delicate, crystal goblet, ignored Shanks's boisterousness. He looked at Naruto, his golden eyes contemplative. That power you used at the end, the orange energy. It felt ancient, alien. It is the source of the chaos that Shanks spoke of. Naruto swirled the wine in his glass. It's a long story. I have time, Mahak said simply. And so Naruto told him. Not everything, but enough. He spoke of Kurama, the tailed beast, a being of pure energy and will, sealed within him. He spoke of their symbiotic relationship, of a partnership forged in battle and understanding. Mahak listened, his expression unchanging. When Naruto finished, he was silent for a long time, staring into the fire. A spirit of immense power, bound to a human will, he finally mused. That is the anomaly the man in white spoke of. The aberration of origin. The mood in the room shifted. The easy camaraderie of post-battle respect replaced by the cold shadow of their new enemy. Naruto felt the familiar chill. That purifier you encountered on Synod, Mahak continued, his gaze distant. I have felt something of its nature before. A disturbing trend growing in the quiet corners of the world. A will of cold iron and glass. A desire for a perfect, silent symmetry. He looked directly at Naruto. It is the antithesis of everything you are. The antithesis of the freedom Shanks champions. It is a will that seeks to correct what it sees as the beautiful, unpredictable chaos of the seas. His words were a stark confirmation of what Ben Beckman had discovered. The threat was real, and it was philosophical. It wasn't just a grab for power, it was an assault on the very nature of their world. They want to cage the storm, Shanks said, his voice low, the usual mirth gone, replaced by the grim authority of a Yonko. They want to put the whole world in a perfectly ordered box. He drained his flagon and slammed it on the table. I'd like to see them try. The firelight glinted in Mahak's golden eyes. They will try, he said, his voice a prophecy. A will as absolute as the one you described does not compromise. It cleanses. And it will see your power, Kitsune, not as a tool or a weapon, but as the ultimate blasphemy. A flaw to be erased from the blueprint. He paused, taking a slow sip of his wine. You have made a powerful, patient, and utterly ruthless enemy. Naruto looked into his glass, at the deep red of the wine. He thought of the cold, dead octahedron. And then he thought of the vibrant, living sapling. He thought of the wild, free chaos of his crew, and the quiet, steady peace he found with Makino. Good, Naruto said, a dangerous light in his blue eyes. I was getting bored. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Weight of a Crown. The first thing that struck Naruto about the island of Veridia was the silence. It wasn't the oppressive, dead quiet of Karaigana, nor the sterile, sound-swallowing null of Praetor Kalis. This was a gentle, placid silence, broken only by the whisper of wind through lush, emerald-green trees and the distant, rhythmic chime of bells. The red force was anchored in a bay of water so clear it looked like liquid glass, and the town that sloped up the hillside from the pristine beach was a postcard of perfection. Houses painted in soft pastels were adorned with overflowing flower boxes. The cobblestone streets were swept clean, devoid of a single piece of refuse. The people, dressed in simple, immaculate clothes, moved with an unhurried, serene grace. They smiled, but their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. They greeted the pirates with polite nods, but there was no curiosity, no fear, no excitement. Their faces were placid masks of contentment. This place gives me the creeps, Lucky Roo muttered, a half-eaten chicken leg paused on its journey to his mouth. It's too clean. There's no bar, Yasop added, scanning the town with his sniper's gaze. No tavern, no gambling den. Just bakeries and flower shops. What kind of port town has no bar? Shanks, leaning against the ship's railing, sniffed the air. No smell of booze, no smell of gunpowder, no smell of trouble. He grinned, but it was a wary expression. Either we've found heaven, or something is deeply wrong here. Naruto stood apart from them. His eyes closed, his hands resting on the wooden rail. He was extending his senses, trying to read the life of the island, and what he felt was profoundly disturbing. The life, energy of the Veridian people was smooth. It was a flat, monotonous hum, like a single, sustained musical note held indefinitely. There were no spikes of joy, no dips of sorrow, no jagged flares of anger or passion. It was a tranquil, uniform sea of utter emotional placidity. It felt wrong. Life was messy. It was a chaotic symphony of highs and lows. This was a single, boring tone. Ben, Naruto said, opening his eyes. Something's wrong with the people. It's like they're hollow. Ben Beckman exhaled a plume of smoke, his gaze fixed on a mother placidly watching her child play on a swing. The child's laughter as metronomically rhythmic as the chiming bells. I see it, he said, his voice low. They're like well-cared-for dolls. No crime, no poverty, no dissent. It's a perfect society, and perfect societies don't exist without a cost. Their quiet analysis was interrupted by a frantic, rustling sound from a nearby grove of fruit trees. It was the first chaotic, unscripted noise they had heard since arriving. A young man, his clothes torn and his face smudged with dirt, burst from the trees, his eyes wide with a desperate, hunted look. He scrambled toward the pirates, his breathing coming in ragged gasps. The placid townspeople on the path nearby turned to look at him, not with alarm, but with a kind of gentle, pitying sadness, as if watching a sick animal. Please, the young man gasped, stumbling to a halt before Shanks. You're the red hair pirates, right? You have to help us. Shanks raised an eyebrow. Help you with what, son? This place looks like it needs our help about as much as the sea needs more water. That's the problem, the man said, his voice trembling with a frustration so raw and real it was a stark contrast to the island's placidity. This piece, it's a lie, it's a cage, she's taken everything from us. Before he could continue, 3 figures in pristine white uniforms, the island's constabulary, appeared on the path. They weren't armed with swords or guns, but with long, smooth batons. They moved with the same serene grace as the other islanders. Elias, the lead constable said, his voice calm and melodic. You are causing a disturbance. Your emotions are unbalanced. Please come with us back to the capital. Her Majesty can soothe your pain. Stay away from me, Elias shrieked, scrambling behind the massive form of Lucky Roo. Naruto stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the constables. Their life energy was the same as the others, smooth, placid, hollow. But there was something else, a faint overlay, like a watermark on a piece of paper. A directive. He doesn't want to go with you, Naruto said, his voice even. The lead constable smiled, a gentle, beatific expression. He is unwell. His spirit is dissonant. It is our duty to restore harmony. He took a step forward. Naruto didn't move, but the air around him grew heavy. A silent pressure emanated from him, a warning that was pure instinct. The constable stopped, his smile faltering for the first time, a flicker of confusion in his placid eyes. He seemed to recognize a force his programmed serenity couldn't comprehend. Ben Beckman stepped up beside Naruto, his hand resting on the hilt of his pistol. The boy is with us. We're old family friends. Just catching up. His tone was casual, but his eyes were like chips of ice. Now, I suggest you go and restore harmony somewhere else. The constables hesitated, their programming warring with the primal threat presented by two top commanders of a Yonko crew. After a long, silent moment, the lead constable gave a slight bow. As you wish. May your day be tranquil. They turned and walked away with the same unhurried grace, leaving a stunned Elias staring after them. They just gave up, Elias stammered. They never give up. They're not used to people who can push back, Shanks said, his jovial demeanor gone completely. He looked down at the young man. All right, son, you've got our attention. Start from the beginning. Who is she, and what has she taken? They took Elias into the captain's quarters of the Red Force, a space that smelled of old maps, expensive liquor, and Shanks' indomitable will. Elias, surrounded by the powerful, chaotic energy of the pirate crew, seemed to breathe freely for the first time. He told his story in a rush, words tumbling over each other in his haste to make them understand. She was Queen Alara of Veridia. Years ago, pirates had raided the island, an act of brutal, senseless violence that had claimed the lives of the king and their only child. Alara, consumed by grief and trauma, had been left with a broken heart and a broken kingdom. In her despair, she had eaten a devil fruit she found in the royal vaults, the Pax fruit. At first, it was a blessing, Elias explained. His hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. She could soothe grief, calm anger, stop fights before they started. She healed the island's broken spirit. But the power grew, or perhaps, her definition of pawn expanded. She began to see not just grief and anger as wounds to be healed, but all strong emotion. Passionate love led to jealousy. Ambitious dreams led to disappointment. Fiery debate led to conflict. One by one, she began to soothe them away. She didn't use force. She simply exuded a field of tranquilizing energy. People who were angry would suddenly feel calm. People who were grieving would feel a gentle emptiness. People who were deeply in love would find their passion cooled to a placid, polite affection. She thinks she's saving us, Elias said, his voice thick with a despair that was almost palpable. She took our pain, but she took everything else with it. Our art, our music, our ambition, our love. We don't live anymore. We just exist. We are a kingdom of ghosts in smiling bodies. Naruto listened, a cold knot forming in his stomach. This was a twisted, horrifying perversion of what he himself strove for. He fought to protect people's ability to live, to laugh, to cry. This queen was protecting them from living. How are you not affected? Ben asked, his eyes narrowed in thought. There's a few of us, Elias said. The resistance. We found an old man. A recluse living in the high mountains. A hockey master. He can't fight her power directly, but he taught us how to shield our spirits. To build walls in our minds to keep our emotions safe. But it's a constant struggle. It's exhausting. And one by one, she finds us. She doesn't punish us. She heals us. It's worse than any prison. He looked at Shanks, his eyes pleading. Please, you're pirates. You're free. Can't you free us, too? The room was silent. The moral weight of the request settled on all of them. This wasn't a simple matter of beating a tyrannical king. Queen Alara wasn't a villain in the traditional sense. She was a traumatized woman, a broken mother and wife, who was genuinely trying to create a paradise, a world without the pain that had destroyed her own. To liberate Veridia would mean destroying her life's work. It would mean plunging this placid, peaceful island back into the messy, chaotic, painful reality of true human emotion. It would mean reintroducing heartbreak, anger, and grief to a people who no longer remembered what they felt like. Shanks looked around the room, at the grim faces of his commanders. His gaze finally settled on Naruto. He saw the conflict warring in his subordinates' eyes. Naruto, who had known more pain and loss than anyone, was now being asked to inflict it on an entire kingdom for the sake of an ideal. Kitsune, Shanks said, his voice quiet but firm. This isn't a fight that can be won with fists or cannons. This is a battle of philosophy. He stood up, his presence filling the room. You understand the cost of pain better than any of us. You also understand the value of the things that grow from it. The choice of what we do here, I'm leaving it to you. Naruto's head snapped up, his eyes wide. The weight of the entire island, of all those hollow, smiling people, was just dropped squarely on his shoulders. He looked at Shanks, seeking a sign, a hint of what the captain wanted. But Shanks's face was unreadable, a mask of trust. He was giving Naruto not just the authority, but the full burden of the decision. Naruto spent the rest of the day walking the silent streets of Veridia alone. He watched children play games with no laughter. He saw couples walk hand in hand with no spark of affection in their eyes. He visited a baker who created flawless, beautiful cakes that tasted of nothing. It was a perfect world. And it was a nightmare. It was a living, breathing version of the infinite Tsukuyomi he had fought so hard to prevent. A gentle, beautiful cage. He knew what he had to do. It was going to be ugly. It was going to be cruel. But it was necessary. That evening, he scaled the walls of the royal palace, a silent shadow moving through the serene, moonlit gardens. The guards didn't see him. They weren't looking for threats. Why would they? There was no conflict in Veridia. He found the queen in her private chambers. It wasn't a throne room, but a simple, elegant room with a balcony overlooking the sleeping, silent city. Queen Alara was beautiful, with long, silver hair and a face etched with a deep, permanent sadness that her own power could not soothe. She was surrounded by the gentle, pacifying aura of her devil fruit power, a palpable field of tranquility. She wasn't surprised to see him appear on her balcony. Her expression was one of weary resignation. You were one of the pirates, she said, her voice a soft, melodic whisper. From the resistance, I presume. Have you come to kill me? No, Naruto said, stepping into the room. He felt her power wash over him. A gentle suggestion to be calm, to let go of his worries, to accept the peace. It was incredibly seductive. He had to consciously focus his own chakra, his own will, to keep it at bay. I came to talk. There is nothing to talk about, she said, turning to look out at her perfect city. I have created a world without pain. A world where no mother has to feel the agony of losing her child. Where no one has to suffer the sting of betrayal or the emptiness of loss. It is a gift. It's a prison, Naruto countered, his voice quiet but firm. You didn't take their pain. You took their ability to feel. You can't have joy without sadness. You can't have love without the risk of heartbreak. You've traded life itself for safety. A flicker of something, the first real emotion he'd seen on this island, crossed her face. It was anger. What would you know of pain? She whispered, her voice trembling. You, a pirate, a bringer of chaos and destruction. The very thing that took my family from me. Naruto didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply closed his eyes and reached inward, not for Kurama's power, but for his own memories. He reached for the crushing loneliness of his childhood. The sting of being called a demon, the agony of watching his friends fall in battle, the heartbreak of losing his master, his parents, his entire world. He gathered all of it, all that pain, all that loss, all that grief. Then, he didn't attack her with it. He didn't force it on her. He gently projected it, using the most delicate chakra control he possessed. He offered it to her. He wasn't showing her his memories as images, but as pure, unadulterated feeling. He was sharing his pain with her. The pacifying aura around the queen wavered. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her chest, a gasp escaping her lips. She was feeling it, not just seeing it, but feeling it, the raw, unfiltered agony of a life lived in the heart of conflict. She felt the loneliness of a child ostracized. She felt the desperate struggle of a warrior. She felt the deep, aching void of loss. But then Naruto did something else. He projected the other memories. The warmth of Iruka's hand on his head. The joy of eating ramen with his team. The fierce pride of protecting his village. The unshakable bond with his friends. The quiet, profound peace of sitting in a bar with a kind woman with green hair. The joy, the love, the hope, all of it. Inextricably linked to the pain. Tears streamed down Queen Alara's face. For the first time in years, she was feeling something other than her own unending grief. She was feeling someone else's life. In all its messy, painful, beautiful glory. To live is to feel, Naruto said softly, opening his eyes. They were filled with an empathy that transcended words. All of it, the good and the bad. You can't have one without the other. By trying to protect your people from pain, you've robbed them of the very things that make life worth living. You've robbed them of the chance to be as strong as you were. He took a step closer. You survived the worst pain imaginable. You endured. That strength, that resilience, you've denied that to your people. A life without pain is a life without growth. It's a life without meaning. He stopped before her, his gaze unwavering. I'm not going to force you. I'm not going to hurt you. The choice is yours. You can keep your tranquil cage, or you can give your people back their lives. Their real lives. And I promise you, my crew and I will stay. We will protect this island from any external threat until they are strong enough to stand on their own again. He was offering her not a threat, but a choice. And a promise. Queen Alara looked at him, her eyes filled with a maelstrom of emotions she hadn't felt in years. She looked at her hands. The source of her power, the source of her people's placid emptiness. She looked out at her silent, perfect city. And she wept. She wept for her lost family, for her broken heart, and for the profound mistakes she had made. They were tears of real, agonizing, cleansing grief. With a shuddering breath that sounded like a dam breaking, she whispered, I let go. And she did. Across the entire island of Veridia, the gentle, pacifying field of her power vanished. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. It was as if the world had gone from black and white to technicolor in a single, violent instant. In the streets below, a man who had been politely walking with his wife suddenly stopped, looked at her, and burst into tears, years of unexpressed love and affection flooding him at once. A baker, who had been methodically kneading dough, hurled it against the wall in a fit of frustration he hadn't been able to feel for a decade. Two neighbors who had a minor D.S. agreement years ago suddenly erupted into a shouting match over a misplaced garden gnome. The island exploded. It was a pandemonium of raw, uncorked emotion. Laughter, so loud and unrestrained it sounded like screaming. Weeping, so deep and guttural it was terrifying. Fights broke out over trivialities. Lovers embraced with a desperate, frantic passion. Old griefs, long suppressed, resurfaced with the force of a tidal wave. It was chaos. It was anarchy. It was ugly, and messy, and painful. And it was beautiful. It was the sound of a people coming alive. Naruto stood on the balcony with the weeping queen, watching the beautiful chaos unfold. He had made his choice. He had chosen a painful freedom over a peaceful prison. As they sailed away a week later, leaving behind an island still reeling, but now vibrant and alive, Ben Beckman stood beside Naruto at the railing. Veridia was a mess. The Red Hair Pirates had spent the week breaking up fights, mediating disputes, and protecting the fragile, new society from itself. Just as Naruto had promised. That was a heavy burden to place on you, Ben said, lighting a cigarette. It was the right choice, Naruto said, his gaze fixed on the receding island. I know, Ben said. But it wasn't an easy one. He paused, then his voice grew grimmer. We also found something. In the Queen's palace. In her royal library, tucked into a book on political theory. He handed Naruto a small, folded piece of paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a diagram. A complex, geometric drawing of what looked like an emotional amplifier, a device designed to enhance and focus a power like the Queen's. The artistry was precise, perfect, and chillingly familiar. In the corner of the page was a small, embossed seal. It was a perfect, black octahedron. One of the Queen's advisors, who left a few months ago, gave her that book, Ben explained. He encouraged her to expand her power, told her it was her duty to create a perfect, tranquil world. He saw her kingdom as a prototype, a test run for what he called the architect's grand design. Naruto stared at the diagram, a cold fury building in his chest. They hadn't just stumbled upon this moral crucible by chance. The purifiers had been here. They had cultivated this situation, using a broken woman's grief as a petri dish for their philosophy of a sterilized world. They're not just fighting us, Naruto said, his voice low and dangerous. They're experimenting. They're testing their weapons, their philosophy, on innocent people. He looked out at the endless horizon, the sea a vast expanse of freedom. He thought of the purifiers, cold, calculated cruelty. He thought of the sterile white void, and the voice that had called him a flaw. The fight was becoming more and more personal. They had twisted a woman's love into a weapon of oppression. And that was something Naruto Uzumaki could never forgive. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Harbor Storm. The years at sea had a way of sanding down the sharp edges of time, turning months into a blur of blue water, starry nights, and the exhilarating chaos of a pirate's life. Naruto had grown from a young man into a seasoned veteran of the Grand Line. His reputation as the Red Hair Pirates, Kitsune, a whispered legend in the darker corners of the world. He was a master of his abilities, a pillar of strength within the crew, and yet, a part of him remained tethered. An invisible line of chakra and longing that stretched across the unpredictable seas back to a small, peaceful island in the East Blue. After a particularly brutal campaign NST a rival fleet that had dared to fly a false red hair flag, Shanks had declared an extended period of shore leave for his core crew. Go get lost for a few months, the captain had ordered, a wide grin on his face. Find a new vice. Get into some trouble I don't have to clean up, or just remember what the ground feels like. We've earned it. For Naruto, there was only one destination. He didn't take a ship, he didn't need one. In a display of chakra control that still left his crewmates shaking their heads, he simply walked away from the Red Force one morning, his feet finding purchase on the surface of the ocean. And began a steady, loping run toward the rising sun. Days later, a lone figure in a familiar orange and black jacket walked up the well-worn path to Fuchsia Village. The place was unchanged, a perfect snapshot of peace preserved in the amber of time. The air still smelled of salt and fishing nets, and the gentle rhythm of village life was a soothing balm to his soul. He didn't go to the docks. He went straight to Party's bar. He pushed open the swinging doors, and the world outside once again fell away. The bar was quiet, bathed in the warm, honeyed light of the late afternoon. And she was there, behind the counter, her dark green hair a little longer, a few faint, laugh lines around her eyes that only made her more beautiful. She was wiping down a glass, her movement as unhurried and graceful as he remembered. She looked up, and her hands stilled. The glass slipped from her fingers, but she didn't seem to notice as it clattered onto the wooden counter. Her dark eyes, warm and deep, widened. A universe of emotion passed through them in a single, breathtaking moment. Shock, disbelief, relief, and a joy so profound it was like the sun breaking through the clouds. Naruto, she breathed, his name a prayer on her lips. Makino, he replied, and the simple act of saying her name felt like coming home. He crossed the room in a few long strides and slid onto his usual stool. He didn't need to say anything else. The years of separation dissolved in the comfortable, profound silence that had always been their unique language. She reached across the counter, her hand hovering for a moment before she gently laid it on his. It was a simple touch, but it anchored him more firmly than any anchor had ever held the Red Force. "You're really here," she whispered, as if afraid he was a mirage. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers with hers. "I'm here." In the corner of the bar, on a small, sunlit shelf, sat a tiny, perfect tree. Its leaves were a vibrant, impossible green, glowing with a soft, internal light. It had grown, its branches twisting into a beautiful, intricate pattern. It was a living testament to his promise, and its vibrant pulse of life was a mirror of his own. His shore leave was not measured in days or weeks, but in shared moments. He helped her in the bar, their movements falling into an easy, familiar rhythm. He walked with her along the cliffs at sunset. The same cliffs where a 7-year-old Luffy had once declared his dream to the world. He listened to her stories of the village, of the boy with the straw hat who had finally set out to sea and was now making a name for himself, his wanted poster a source of both pride and terror for the mayor. And one evening, sitting by the fire in the bar long after the last customer had gone home, he finally told her everything. He told her of a world of shinobi and jutsus, of a great war that had scarred the land and his soul. He told her about the nine-tailed fox, the demon that had been his curse and was now his partner, a grumpy, ancient being of immense power named Kurama who resided within him. He told her of being torn from his world, of the crushing loneliness and loss, and of the red-hair pirates who had given him a new family. He laid his entire life, all his pain and all his burdens, bare before her. Makino listened, her expression never wavering from one of deep, profound empathy. She didn't flinch at the talk of demons or other worlds. She didn't recoil from the violence of his past. She simply saw the lonely boy at the heart of the powerful man, he orphan who had lost one home and was still tentative about claiming another. When he finished, his voice raw with the emotion of his confession, she didn't offer platitudes or words of comfort. She simply stood up, walked around the bar, and sat on the stool next to him. She took his hand, the one that could shatter mountains, and held it gently in both of her own. "You carried all of that alone for so long," she said. Her voice soft but firm. "You don't have to anymore. Let me help you carry it." In that moment, the last of his defenses crumbled. This was it. This was the peace he fought for, the home he yearned for. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. Their first kiss wasn't a clash of passion, but a quiet, breathtaking recognition. It was a promise of a future, a confirmation of a love that had grown silently, patiently, over years of distance and longing. It tasted of salt, and sake, and a profound sense of rightness. The days that followed were idyllic. For the first time, Naruto allowed himself to fully relax, to let the constant vigilance of the warrior recede. He was not Kitsune of the Red Hair Pirates. He was just Naruto, a man in love with a kind woman in a peaceful village. He was home. The peace was shattered on a day that had started with a perfect, cloudless sky. Naruto was in the forest behind the village, gathering a specific type of fragrant wood Makino liked for her fireplace. He was using sage mode, not for defense, but simply to enjoy the vibrant symphony of life around him, the scurrying of squirrels, the rustling of leaves, the steady, deep life of the ancient trees. And then he felt it. The cold. It was the same dead, sterile void he had felt on Synod, but it was 1,000 times more powerful. It wasn't a pinprick this time. It was a gaping wound torn in the fabric of reality. It appeared in the sky above the forest, a vast zone of absolute nothingness that snuffed out the life energy of the very air it occupied. Kurama roared to life in his mind. "Naruto, above you, it's them." Naruto looked up. The sky was clear, but he could feel the presence, a suffocating blanket of anti-life pressing down. And descending from the heavens, wreathed in an aura of shimmering geometric light, was a figure. It was not a man. It was a woman, or something that wore a woman's form. She was unnaturally beautiful, with skin like polished white marble, and hair the color of spun moonlight that floated around her as if underwater. She wore a simple, elegant robe of pure white, and her eyes were perfect, silver spheres, devoid of pupils, radiating a cold, impassive light. She had no discernible life force. She was a perfect, beautiful, terrifying void. This was Seraphim Kalia, the architect's hand of order, his most powerful and trusted servant. She descended until she hovered 100 feet above the forest canopy, her silver eyes scanning the woods below. Her gaze was not that of a predator searching for prey. It was the gaze of a collector, searching for a specific specimen. Anomaly of the ninth chaos, her voice echoed, not through the air, but directly in Naruto's mind, a crystalline, emotionless chime. The architect requires your energy. The blueprint must be completed. Surrender the aberration of origin. Your container is irrelevant. The essence is all that matters. She wasn't talking to him. She was talking to Kurama. And she was here to acquire him. Like a biologist collecting a sample. A cold, primal fury, deeper and more potent than any he had ever felt, surged through Naruto. This thing had come to his sanctuary. It was threatening his peace. His home, the world where Makino lived. Get out of here, Naruto growled, his voice a low thunder. He flared his own chakra, a golden sun of defiance against her cold void. This is my home. You are not welcome. Kalia's head tilted, a minute, bird-like movement. Home, love, peace, irrelevant variables, emotional clutter. They are flaws in the design. They will be corrected. She raised a hand, her palm open towards the forest. To expedite the acquisition, I will deconstruct the environment. The container will have no choice but to reveal the essence. The air around her hand began to warp. The lush, green leaves of the trees below her began to lose their color, turning a dull, uniform gray. The bark of the ancient trees began to shimmer, the rough texture smoothing out. The wood transforming, its very essence being rewritten. With a silent, horrifying grace, a section of the forest 100 yards wide began to turn into a forest of perfect, clear glass. The trees, the bushes, the very dirt on the ground, all of it was deconstructed and reformed into a sterile, crystalline mockery of life. Naruto stared in horror. This power was beyond Kalis's. This wasn't just erasing things. This was rewriting reality on a fundamental level. He couldn't fight her here. The collateral damage would be immense. He had to draw her away. But as he prepared to move, her silver, pupilless eyes swiveled, and her gaze moved past him, past the forest, and settled on the small, peaceful village by the sea. Ah! Her voice chimed in his mind. A focal point of the emotional clutter. An anchor for the container. Deconstructing this variable should prove efficient. She began to drift, not toward Naruto, but toward Fuchsia village. Toward Makino. No, Naruto roared. The fury that had been simmering within him exploded. There was no holding back. No half measures. She had threatened his home. She had targeted his heart. He didn't just access Kurama's power. He tore open the gates. Kurama, roar. A tidal wave of crimson chakra erupted from him, so vast and violent it bent the very air. It was a column of raw, untamed power that shot into the sky, a declaration of war against the heavens. His body transformed, no longer coated in a simple cloak. He grew, his form expanding, the red, bubbling chakra solidifying into the shape of a colossal, nine-tailed fox. A beast of myth and legend made of pure, burning energy. The Kurama avatar, in all its apocalyptic glory, stood tall, dwarfing the glass forest, its 9 tails lashing the air with furious intent. Kalia stopped. Her drift toward the village halted. She turned to face the colossal beast, her expressionless face for the first time showing a flicker of data processing. Analysis, her mental voice stated. The aberration's output exceeds projected parameters. This form is a significant deviation from the expected chaos signature. It is magnificent. The avatar of Kurama opened its mouth, and a voice that was both Naruto's and the fox's boomed across the island, a sound that cracked the glass trees and shook the foundations of the village. You will not touch her. The fight was not a duel. It was a clash of fundamental forces. Kalia raised her hand, and a wave of deconstruction energy shot toward the avatar, a shimmering wall of nothingness that turned the air itself into geometric fractals. Naruto didn't try to overpower it. He met it with pure life. He slammed one of the avatar's massive chakra arms into the ground, not as an attack, but as a conduit. Drawing on the limitless well of natural energy from Sage Mode and combining it with Kurama's colossal power, he didn't block the deconstruction wave. He healed it. A wave of golden-green life energy surged from the ground, meeting the wall of nothingness. Where the two forces met, the air sizzled and warped. The sterile geometry of Kalia's attack was overwhelmed, broken apart, and replaced by an explosion of life, trees, flowers, and grasses sprouting from thin air, living and dying in a matter of seconds in a hyper-accelerated display of nature's chaotic beauty. Kalia's silver eyes widened a fraction. Life, overriding the blueprint. A qualitative paradox. Fascinating. She changed tactics. She wasn't just an eraser, she was an architect. The glass forest behind her shattered, and the millions of shards flew into the air. Reforming at her command, they coalesced into a swarm of razor-winged crystalline birds, each one a perfect, silent weapon. They shot toward the avatar in a glittering, deadly cloud. Naruto responded in kind. He formed a Rasengan in the avatar's hand, but instead of pure chakra, he compressed the life-giving energy into it. It wasn't a tailed beast bomb of destruction. It was a concentrated sphere of pure, unadulterated life. He hurled it into the swarm. When the sphere detonated, it didn't explode. It bloomed. A colossal tree of golden light erupted in the middle of the swarm, its branches ensnaring the crystal birds. The life energy pulsed, and the sterile glass of the birds was infected. Cracks of green light spread through them, and with a sound like shattering chandeliers. The entire swarm disintegrated, not into shards, but into a shower of harmless, glowing pollen. This battle was beyond anything the world had seen. It was a war of concepts, order versus chaos, sterility versus life. But Naruto was not just fighting for a concept. He was fighting for his home. His focus was absolute, his power channeled not into destruction, but into pure, unwavering defense. He formed shields of living chakra to absorb Kalia's deconstruction beams. He used the Avatar's tails to sweep away her geometric constructs, turning them to dust and soil. He was a god of life fighting an angel of nothingness. In the village, the people were in a panic. The ground shook. The sky was filled with flashes of red and white light. The roar of the great fox Avatar was a terrifying, primal sound. But Makino was not panicking. She stood on the cliffside path, her hand gripping the railing, her eyes fixed on the colossal, nine-tailed figure of burning orange energy that stood between her village and the silent, terrifying being in the sky. She felt no fear of the monster. She recognized the will behind it. She recognized the protective fury. She knew, with an absolute certainty born of love, that the great beast was Naruto. She turned to the terrified villagers. To the shelters. She commanded, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the noise. Now, get the children, and the elderly to the mayor's cellar. Move. She was not a damsel. She was the heart of this village. And while Naruto was its shield, she would be its shepherd. The battle raged, but Kalia was beginning to understand. She could not win. Not here. Not against this. The anomaly was not just a source of chaotic energy. It was a fountain of life itself, and its will to protect its anchor was an absolute variable she could not compute or overcome. To continue would be inefficient. Acquisition postponed. Her voice chimed in Naruto's mind, a note of what might have been frustration, or perhaps just a recalibration of her mission parameters. New data has been gathered. The container's emotional anchor is a key vulnerability and a primary power source. Future strategies will be adjusted accordingly. With that, she simply dissolved. Her perfect, marble-like form broke apart into a cascade of white, geometric light, which then folded in on itself and vanished into a pinprick of nothingness. The oppressive void that had smothered the island was gone. Silence returned. The great, nine-tailed avatar of Kurama stood for a moment longer, its chest heaving. Then, it slowly began to recede. The crimson chakra flowing back into Naruto, the colossal form shrinking until only he was left, standing in a newly grown meadow, his clothes torn, his body steaming with residual energy. He fell to one knee, panting. The sheer exertion of the battle hitting him all at once. He had won. He had protected his home. But the cost was immense. The sanctuary was broken. They knew where he was. They knew what he cared for. He felt a presence and looked up. Makino was running toward him, her face pale but her eyes fierce with determination and concern. She didn't slow as she reached him, dropping to her knees and throwing her arms around his neck, holding him with a strength that belied her slender frame. He wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her hair, breathing in her scent. He was shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash and the terrifying realization of what he had almost lost. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're okay. We're okay." They were. But for how long? The aftermath was swift. The world government, which had long kept only a token marine presence in the East Blue, responded to the unexplained seismic and atmospheric phenomena over Fuchsia village with unprecedented speed. Within a week, a massive fleet of marine warships arrived. They weren't attacking. They were establishing a new base. A fortress, built on the headland overlooking the village's only deep-water harbor. Officially, it was to protect the citizens of the East Blue from rising pirate threats. Naruto knew the truth. He could feel it, hidden among the regular marines. Their life energies masked but not perfectly, were a handful of individuals with that same, faint, sterile chill. Purifiers. They weren't here to protect the village. They were here to watch it. To contain him. They had used the incident he had caused to box him in, turning his sanctuary into a gilded cage. He knew he couldn't stay. His presence here was no longer a secret. It was a beacon, drawing the most dangerous enemy he had ever faced directly to the person he loved most. The night before he had to leave, he stood with Makino on the cliffs, the new, half-finished marine fortress, a dark, ugly scar on the horizon. "They're here because of me," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "As long as I'm here, you'll never be safe." Makino turned to him, her expression serious. She took his face in her hands. "Naruto, listen to me. My safety is not your burden. It's my choice. My life is here, but my heart—" She trailed off, her thumb gently stroking his cheek. "My heart is with you, wherever you go. Don't you dare think for a second that your fight isn't my fight, too." She looked at the fortress. "They think they've trapped you. But a fox is never trapped. It just finds a new way out of the den." Her strength, her unwavering belief in him, washed away his guilt, replacing it with a burning resolve. He wasn't just fighting to protect her anymore. He was fighting for them. For the future they had just begun to build. He pulled her close, and their lips met in a kiss that was fierce, desperate, and full of unspoken promises. It wasn't a kiss of goodbye. It was a kiss that said, "This is not the end. I will come back. We will have our peace." When he left the next morning, running across the water once more into the rising sun, he carried the memory of that kiss, the fire of her spirit, and a new, unshakable purpose. He was no longer just a pirate seeking freedom or a protector defending his home. He was a man fighting for his future. And he would burn the world down to secure it. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Red Flag of War. Naruto's return to the Red Hair Pirates was not a quiet affair. He intercepted the Red Force in the treacherous waters of the New World, appearing on the deck in a shimmer of speed that sent a rookie crewman tumbling into a stack of barrels. He was not the relaxed man who had left months ago. He was a storm contained, a blade honed to a razor's edge. The idyllic peace of Fuchsia village had been replaced by a cold, burning fire in his eyes. He stood before Shanks and the assembled commanders in the strategy room, the air thick with tension as he recounted the battle with Seraphim Kalia. He described her power to deconstruct reality, the glass forest, the crystalline birds, and her terrifyingly cold, clinical intellect. But it was his description of her ultimate goal, the acquisition of Kurama, and her willingness to target Makino to achieve it that turned the atmosphere in the room from serious to deadly. Shanks, who had been listening with a grim stillness, slammed his open palm on the map table. The wood didn't crack, but a wave of pure, undiluted conqueror's hockey rolled through the room, so potent it made the very air feel thick and heavy. It wasn't an uncontrolled outburst. It was a statement, a drawing of a line. "They put a cage around your home," Shanks said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that held none of its usual mirth. "They targeted a civilian under the protection of my flag. They declared war on us when they did that, Kitsune. They just didn't have the guts to say it to our faces." Ben Beckman, his face wreathed in smoke, looked at the map of the new world spread before them. "This Kalia," she mentioned, gathering new data, adjusting strategies. "This wasn't a failure for them. It was a field test. They were probing your limits, Naruto. And more importantly, they were identifying your weakness." He tapped a finger on the map, far from the east blue. "They now know that the most effective way to fight you is not to fight you at all. It's to threaten the things you care about." The implication hung in the air, cold and sharp. Fuchsia village was only the beginning. Every island under the Red Hair flag, every ally, every friend, was now a potential target. A pawn in the Purifier's sterile, cosmic game. Their enemy, Lord Imuel, was enraged. Not with the passionate fury of a pirate king, but with the cold, logical anger of a master architect who discovers a fundamental flaw in his materials. The Kurama anomaly was more powerful, more volatile, and more deeply integrated with its container than his Void Century data had suggested. Seraphim Kalia's report was clear. Direct acquisition was inefficient. A new strategy was required. The anomaly had to be isolated, stripped of its support structure. Its Emotional clutter. The red hair pirates, the very embodiment of the chaotic freedom he sought to erase, were not just an obstacle, they were the anomaly's primary power source. And so, the architect gave a new decree. Not to capture, but to cleanse. The attack came without warning. It targeted not a fortress or a strategic military outpost, but the heart of Red Hair Pirates' territory, the Muse Archipelago. It was a vibrant, chaotic cluster of islands populated not by warriors, but by artists, musicians, poets, and dreamers. It was a place that produced no weapons and held no tactical value. But to Shanks, it represented the very soul of the freedom he championed. It was a testament to a world where people could live as they chose, creating beauty out of chaos. To the purifiers, it was a festering wound of emotional dissonance. A symphony of noise that had to be silenced. A fleet of ships materialized from the mists of the New World, appearing on the horizon of the main island of Muse. They were not marine warships or pirate vessels. They were sleek, white crafts of an unnerving, perfect symmetry, cutting through the waves with a silent, unnatural grace. At their head was a flagship that looked less like a ship and more like a floating cathedral of white marble and glass. On the deck of that flagship stood Praetor Kalis, his body fully restored. His face the same mask of cold indifference. Beside him stood a new figure, a massive, brute of a man encased in geometric, white armor, his face hidden behind a helm shaped like a perfect cube. This was Centurion Verlag, the architect's hammer, a purifier whose power was not subtle deconstruction, but explosive, orderly demolition. The first volley was not cannonballs. It was silence. Projectors on the purifier ships activated, casting a shimmering field over the main island. Sound died. The lively music from the port town, the chatter of the crowds, the cry of the gulls, all of it vanished. The world was plunged into a deafening quiet. Then came the cleansing. Beams of white light shot from the ships, striking the vibrant, colorful town. But they didn't explode. Where they hit, the world was rewritten. A bustling marketplace of overflowing stalls and shouting vendors was transformed into a plaza of smooth, gray, uniform cubes. A row of houses, each unique and painted with the owner's personality, was deconstructed and reformed into a single, long, featureless white block. The very earth was being sterilized, the beautiful chaos of the town being corrected into a sterile, geometric landscape. The red hair pirates received the news via a frantic, terrified Den Den Mushi call from a lookout on a neighboring island, his voice shaking as he described the silent, impossible destruction. By the time the call was cut short, the Red Force was already changing course, its sails straining as it raced toward Muse. The mood on the ship was grim. This was it, the first open battle of the war. They're not trying to conquer it, Ben said, his voice tight as he studied the frantic, half-finished sketch the lookout had managed to send. They're erasing it. This is a punitive expedition. A message. It's more than that, Naruto said, his fists clenched, his senses stretched to their absolute limit. Even from this distance, he could feel the life energy of the archipelago being systematically snuffed out. Replaced by that cold, dead nothingness. This is an execution. They're trying to cut out the heart of our territory to demoralize us. To show the world that our freedom is a liability. Shanks stood at the prow, his red hair whipping in the wind, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He said nothing, but his haki radiated from the ship in a palpable wave, a promise of the storm to come. When they arrived, the scene was worse than they had imagined. The main island was a nightmare of sterile geometry, half of it transformed into a silent, white city of blocks ND cubes under the shimmering null field. The purifier fleet formed a blockade, their ships arranged in a perfect, impenetrable formation. The battle began not with a broadside, but with a sniper's shot. From the crow's nest of the Red Force, Yasop took a deep breath, the world slowing to a crawl in his vision. He saw Praetor Kalis on the deck of the enemy flagship, a mile away, across a churning sea. He fired. The bullet, infused with his own formidable haki, screamed across the distance, aimed directly at the Praetor's head. Just before it hit, a shimmering null field appeared in front of Kalis. The bullet entered the field. Its momentum and haki instantly dampened, and it dropped harmlessly into the sea. Their defenses are absolute, Yasop reported grimly over the ship's internal Den Den Mushi. Shanks grinned, a feral, dangerous expression. Then we'll just have to get a little messy. He turned to his first mate. Ben, you have the con. Break their pretty little formation. Ben Beckman stepped forward, his eyes scanning the enemy fleet, his mind a whirlwind of tactical calculations. Lucky, Hongo, bonk. Starboard flank, focus fire on their propulsion. Create a gap, Yasop. Target their weapon emitters. Not their personnel. Naruto. Naruto's head snapped up. You're the tip of the spear, Ben commanded. Their power works on the principles of this world. Hockey, devil fruits, physical matter. You are outside their system. You're the chaos they can't calculate. Get to that main island. Stop the terraforming. Find the source of that field. We'll keep them busy out here. Naruto nodded, a grim determination on his face. He didn't need to be told twice. He vaulted onto the ship's railing, his body already glowing with a faint, golden light as he activated Sage Mode. The battle for the Muse Archipelago erupted. The Red Hair Pirates, a force of beautiful, controlled chaos, slammed into the Purifier's perfect, sterile order. Ben Beckman was a genius, directing the Red Force in a series of brilliant, unpredictable maneuvers that forced the Purifier fleet to break their flawless formation. Lucky Roo led a boarding party, his massive form a wrecking ball of disruption on the deck of an enemy ship. Cannons roared, steel clashed against sterile white armor, and the sea itself boiled with the conflict. Above it all, Shanks stood on the deck of his ship, his hand resting on the hilt of his cutlass. Griffin. He hadn't moved yet. He was a king observing the board, his mere presence a colossal weight on the enemy's morale. His target was not the fleet, but the giant in the cubic helm. Centurion Verlag, who he could feel was the commander of the enemy's raw power. Naruto didn't wait for an opening. He made one. He shot off the Red Force like a cannonball, running across the surface of the water. He was an orange blur against the gray sea, heading directly for the shimmering dome of silence over the island. Purifier ships turned their weapons on him, firing beams of deconstruction energy. He didn't dodge. He formed two shadow clones as he ran. They shot ahead of him and took the hits, dissolving into smoke. He reached the edge of the silent dome and plunged through. The world went dead. The roar of the naval battle behind him, the crash of the waves, his own footsteps, all gone. It was like being plunged underwater, but 100 times more disorienting. The deadening of his Sage Mode was even more profound than it had been on Synod. He didn't slow down. He pushed through the silent city of white blocks, the sterile landscape an offense to his very being. In the center of the transformed city, he saw the source. It was a colossal, black octahedron, the size of a house, hovering a few feet off the ground. It was identical to the one Kalis had left behind, but massive. And it was pulsing with a black, anti-life light, radiating the silence and the deconstruction energy that was rewriting the island. It was the heart of the operation. Surrounding it were dozens of Purifier soldiers and several smaller, man-sized octahedrons that seemed to be acting as relays. Naruto didn't hesitate. He formed a dozen shadow clones, and the silent battle for the heart of the island began. It was a surreal, ghostly affair. Punches that could shatter stone made no sound upon impact. Rasengans that ground through Purifier armor did so in utter silence. The Purifiers fought with cold, geometric precision, their blades of solidified light moving in perfect, predictable arcs. But Naruto's clones were chaos incarnate. They were unpredictable, overwhelming, and utterly relentless. While his clones engaged the soldiers, the real Naruto made a beeline for the central octahedron. As he got closer, he felt a new sensation. A pull, a sickeningly familiar IAR resonance in the very core of his being, where Kurama resided. The octahedron wasn't just a power source. It was connected to something. Something he knew. He placed his hand on its cold, smooth surface. And his mind exploded. He was no longer on Muse. He was back in his own world, in the final moments of the war. He saw Kaguya, her face a mask of cold fury. He saw her unleash her final, desperate attack, the all-killing Ash Bones. Designed not just to kill, but to erase. He saw himself and Sasuke meeting it with their own ultimate techniques. He saw the explosion, the tear in reality, the portal that had flung him into this world. And he saw something else. A sliver of Kaguya's power, a tiny, infinitesimally small fragment of the God Tree's divine energy, had been torn away in the explosion. It had been flung through the portal with him, a stowaway, a seed of another world. This was the horrifying truth. The octahedron, the purifier's power, Lord Imuel's ability to rewrite the world, it all stemmed from that single corrupted seed of the god tree. A power that was intrinsically linked to the tailed beasts. A power that was intrinsically linked to him. They are using my own world's power against me, he realized. A wave of nausea and fury washing over him. He was the unwitting source of this plague. He had brought this curse to this new, free world. The revelation was a hammer blow to his spirit. For a moment, he faltered, the weight of his guilt a physical burden. The purifiers sensed his hesitation and pressed their attack. But then, he felt something else. Through his connection to the octahedron, he could feel the network. He could feel all the smaller relays. And he could feel the link stretching back across the sea, to the purifier flagship, to Praetor Kalis. And beyond Kalis, he could feel a thin, fragile thread leading to the architect himself. And in that moment, his despair transformed into a cold, hard resolve. If he was the source, then he was also the key. He poured his own chakra into the octahedron. Not to destroy it, but to hijack it. He didn't fight the god tree's energy. He spoke to it in its own language, the language of the Sage of Six Paths. He used his unique connection, his status as the meeting point of all tailed beasts, to seize control of the network. On the Purifier flagship, Kalis stumbled back, a hand to his temple. The perfect, orderly flow of energy from the network had just been corrupted by a massive, chaotic influx. What is he doing? He hissed. Back on the island, Naruto grinned, a feral, dangerous expression on his face. My turn, he whispered in the silent world. He reversed the flow. Instead of the octahedron projecting a field of sterile silence, it began to project Naruto's own energy. A wave of vibrant, chaotic life energy washed over the island. The silence was shattered by a deafening roar of life. The smooth, white blocks began to crack, grass and flowers sprouting from the fissures. The gray, sterile ground turned back into rich, brown soil. He wasn't just stopping the terraforming, he was undoing it, using their own network against them. The purifier soldiers shrieked, a sound of pure agony, as the raw, unadulterated life energy washed over their sterile existences. It was like acid to them. They dissolved, not into neat, geometric light, but into dust. Out on the sea, the battle turned. The purifier ships, their power source suddenly corrupted and unstable, began to malfunction. Weapons misfired. Null fields collapsed. Shanks saw his opening. He pointed Griffin at the enemy flagship, at the massive, cube-helmed Centurion Verlag who was trying to restore order. My turn, he said, mirroring Naruto's words. He leapt. He didn't run. He didn't fly. He simply launched himself from the deck of the Red Force. A red blur crossing 1,000 yards of open water in a single, impossible bound. He landed on the deck of the Purifier flagship like a thunderclap, his conqueror's hockey exploding outwards, shattering the will of every lesser soldier on the ship. He stood before Verlag, his cutlass held loosely at his side. You've made a mess in my territory, Shanks said, his voice deceptively casual. You're going to clean it up. Verlag charged, his armored fists glowing with demolition energy. The clash between the Yonko and the Architect's hammer was a battle of gods. There I am. Pacts sending shockwaves that split the very sea around them. Naruto, his work on the island done, left the now thriving heart of the archipelago and raced back to the naval battle. He arrived on the deck of the Purifier flagship just in time to see Shanks disarm Verlag with a flick of his wrist and deliver a hockey-infused slash that cracked the Centurion's perfect armor from top to bottom. Naruto landed beside his captain, his body still glowing with the combined energy of Sage Mode and Kurama. He and Shanks stood back to back, surrounded by the wreckage of the Purifier's command crew. Kalis, seeing the battle was utterly lost, made the only logical choice. He initiated a full retreat, his own ship dissolving into light and vanishing, leaving the rest of his broken, chaotic fleet to be PTU red or destroyed by the triumphant red hair pirates. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the smoking, victorious fleet, Naruto stood on the deck of the Red Force, staring at the corrupted, now inert black octahedron they had brought back from the island. He had won the battle. He had turned their own weapon against them. But the war had just escalated to a terrifying new level. He now knew the source of their power. It was a part of him, a cancer from his own past. To defeat them, he wouldn't just be fighting an enemy. He would have to confront the ghost of Kagaya herself. And he would have to find a way to cleanse his new home of the curse he had unwittingly brought to it. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. Aria for an Unchained World. The victory at the Muse Archipelago was a turning point. It was a brutal, hard-won triumph that left the Red Hair pirates invigorated but sobered. They had faced the Architect's forces and driven them back, but the revelation of the Purifier's power source had changed the nature of the conflict. It was no longer an external threat. It was a deeply personal war, and Naruto was its unwilling epicenter. In the weeks that followed, Ben Beckman and Naruto worked relentlessly, piecing together the puzzle. Using the corrupted octahedron as a key, Naruto was able to tap into the Purifier's network, not to control it, but to listen. He became a ghost in their machine, sifting through streams of sterile data, fragments of orders, and geometric schematics. It was exhausting work, requiring him to dive into the cold, dead echo of the God Tree's energy. A process that left him drained and chilled to the bone. Makino's face, the memory of her warmth, was the anchor he clung to in those cold, digital depths. They learned the name of Imuel's fortress, the Sanctuary. It wasn't a location on any map. It was a mobile citadel, a colossal flying fortress of white marble and glass that hid within the most violent and unpredictable storm systems of the New World. Using the natural chaos to mask its perfect, sterile order. It was powered by the Heart, a massive, cultivated shard of the God Tree, the very one born from the dimensional tear that had brought Naruto to this world. Lord Imuel was nurturing it, preparing it for the final stage of his plan, a global scale, purification, that would use the Heart's energy to rewrite the planet according to his sterile blueprint. The final piece of the puzzle came not from the network, but from the sea itself. One of their allied crews had spotted it, a colossal, stationary super cyclone in a notoriously empty stretch of the Grand Line, a storm that hadn't moved or dissipated in weeks. It was a permanent scar on the world's weather patterns. It was the Sanctuary's hiding place. There was no debate. There was no Grand Council of War. The moment the location was confirmed, the decision was made. They were going on the offensive. They would not wait for the Architect to bring his sterile peace to their world. They would take the war to his front door. The Red Force, leading a small, elite fleet of their most trusted allies, sailed into the heart of the storm. The journey was a battle in itself. The cyclone was a maelstrom of world-ending winds, house-sized waves, and lightning that tore the sky asunder. It was nature's fury at its most absolute. But the Red Hair pirates, masters of the untamed sea, navigated the chaos with a skill that bordered on supernatural. And then they saw it. In the calm, silent eye of the apocalyptic storm, it hung in the air like a blasphemy. The Sanctuary. It was a breathtaking, horrifying sight, a city-sized fortress of pristine white marble and crystalline glass, floating in the sky. Its architecture was all perfect angles and impossible arches, radiating a cold, internal light. It was beautiful, sterile, and utterly soulless. So that's the kingdom of the God of Nothing, Shanks murmured, his hand resting on Griffin's hilt. He turned to his crew, his voice ringing out over the howling wind. They want to chain the world, to silence its song. Let's show them how a free man sings. A deafening roar was his answer. The assault began. The battle plan was simple and suicidally direct. Shanks and his commanders, Ben, Yasop, Ru, and the others, would spearhead the assault on the fortress's power source, the God Tree Heart. Their mission was to sever Imuel's connection to it, to cut the head from the snake. Naruto had a different target. He was going for the throne room. As the ships drew closer, the Sanctuary's defenses activated. Panels slid open in the marble walls, revealing legions of Purifier soldiers and monstrous, deconstructed beasts, amalgams of creatures native to the Grand Line, broken down and reassembled into geometric horrors. Beams of deconstruction energy lanced out. Naruto didn't wait for the ships to get into range. He erupted from the deck of the Red Force in a blaze of crimson and gold. He was already in his Kurama chakra mode, a perfect fusion of his own sage energy and Kurama's power. He was a living sun, a comet of pure life and will, streaking towards the sterile fortress. He slammed into the outer wall of the Sanctuary. And the impact was not an explosion, but a genesis. The white marble where he hit didn't shatter, it bloomed. A riot of vibrant, colossal flowers and thick, thorny vines erupted from the point of impact. Cracking the perfect facade, a beautiful, chaotic wound on the fortress's sterile skin. He moved through the fortress like a force of nature. He didn't just fight the purifiers, he overwrote them. His every touch, every attack, was infused with the chaotic, vibrant energy of life. He turned their sterile halls into jungles, their geometric constructs into dust and pollen. He was not just a warrior. He was an antibody, and the sanctuary was a disease. The red hair pirates followed in his wake. They stormed the breach he had created, a tide of joyous, violent chaos against the silent, ordered defenders. Ben Beckman's strategic mind was a weapon in itself, his bullets finding the weak points in the enemy's command structure. Yasop, perched on the mast of the Red Force, engaged in an impossible long-range battle, his hockey-infused shots taking out weapon emplacements from miles away. Lucky Roo was a bowling ball of destruction, tearing through ranks of purifiers with a laugh on his lips. Shanks moved with a terrifying, calm purpose, his blade a blur. He and his commanders fought their way toward the core, a whirlwind of color and life in a world of white. Naruto, guided by the pull of the God Tree's energy, burst into the final chamber. The throne room. It was a cavernous, cathedral-like space, its walls made of a shimmering, light-absorbing crystal. In the center, on a simple, elevated throne of black obsidian, sat Lord Imul. He was not a monster. He was not a king in armor. He was a slight, androgynous figure with skin the color of pale moonlight and eyes like voids. Twin pools of absolute blackness that seemed to drink the light. He wore simple, white robes, and his presence was one of absolute, soul-crushing stillness. He was the calm at the center of the storm. The silence in the heart of the song. The God Tree heart pulsed behind his throne, a grotesque, living jewel of immense power, its energy flowing directly into him. The anomaly. Imul's voice echoed in Naruto's mind, the same cold, crystalline chime as Kalia's, but with an ancient, bottomless depth. The flaw in the code. The chaotic variable. You have come. I came to pee. Pull the plug on your boring little experiment, Naruto shot back, his body thrumming with power. Imul rose from his throne, his movements slow and graceful. The very space around him began to warp. Crystalline walls of the throne room deconstructed, the floor dissolved, and they were suddenly floating in a void of pure, white nothingness, the same void from Naruto's first nightmare. Boring. Imul's mental voice was tinged with something that might have been curiosity. I am offering the universe its one, true gift. Perfection. An end to the pointless, painful cycle of life and death. An end to chaos. He raised a hand, and the void around them filled with visions. He showed Naruto a world without war, the battlefields of his past now serene, silent fields. He showed him a world without poverty, where every person had what they needed, their desires placated, their ambitions erased. He showed him a world without grief, where loved ones did not die but were simply reabsorbed into the blueprint, their energy recycled. It was the promise of the infinite Tsukuyomi, given a new, sterile, scientific face. You, a child of endless war, should understand this more than any, Imul projected. Freedom is a flaw, emotion is a bug in the system. They are the root of all suffering. I am not a destroyer. I am a healer. I am correcting a failed creation. Naruto looked at the perfect, silent worlds Imul showed him. They were peaceful, they were orderly, and they were dead. You're wrong, Naruto said, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. The pain, the struggle, the failure. That's what gives the good moments their meaning. A world without choice isn't peace, it's a cage. A life without the freedom to fail, to hurt, and to love with everything you have, that's not a life worth living. He thought of his friends, of his crew, of their loud, messy, beautiful chaos. He thought of Shank's easy grin, of Rue's hearty laugh. He thought of Luffy's impossible, boundless dream. And most of all, he thought of Makino. He thought of her gentle smile, the warmth of her hand, the fierce love in her eyes as she stood her ground while he fought a god. Their love wasn't a neat, orderly equation. It was messy, and complicated, and at times painful with distance, but it was real. And it was worth fighting for. I'll take my chaotic, imperfect world over your silent, perfect tomb any day, Naruto declared. The ideological battle was over. The physical one began. Imul attacked, not with beams or constructs, but by deconstructing reality itself. The white void around Naruto warped, the space twisting and folding. Trying to unmake him, to erase him from existence. But Naruto was an anchor of life in a sea of nothingness. He met the deconstruction with pure creation. He unleashed the full, combined might of Sage Mode and Kurama, not as a cloak or an avatar, but as a raw, untamed torrent of life energy. Golden-green light erupted from him, fighting back the encroaching void. Rewriting the architect's sterile code with the messy, beautiful data of life itself. It was a clash of gods, a battle of concepts at the very foundation of reality. The void flickered, the visions shattered, and they were back in the throne room, which was now cracking and groaning under the strain of their conflicting powers. But Naruto knew he couldn't win this way. Imul was connected to the God Tree heart. His power was limitless. As long as that heart beat, Imul was eternal. At that moment, he felt a tremor run through the entire fortress. A massive, concussive wave of pure willpower. So powerful it made the sanctuary itself groan. Shanks. He had reached the heart. The distraction was all Naruto needed. He had a final, desperate gambit. An idea born from his battle on Muse. He couldn't destroy the heart. Not while Imul was drawing power from it. But maybe he didn't have to. He let down his defenses. He stopped fighting the pull of the God Tree heart and instead opened himself to it completely. Imul, sensing victory, surged forward, his deconstruction energy rushing to erase the anomaly once and for all. But Naruto wasn't a passive target. He reached out, not with his fists, but with his mind. With his very soul. He used his unique connection as the Jinchuriki of all tailed beasts, his status as a spiritual successor to the Sage of Six Paths, to connect directly to the heart. And he began to pour his life into it. He didn't pour in power. He poured in memories. He poured in the taste of Ichiraku ramen. He poured in the feeling of graduating from the academy, the pride of wearing his first headband. He poured in the sting of Sasuke's betrayal and the fierce, burning loyalty that never let him give up on his friend. He poured in the weight of Jiraiya's final words. The warmth of his parents' love, the joy of being hailed as a hero. He poured in the roar of the sea, the feel of the wind in the sails of the Red Force. He poured in the sound of his crew's laughter. The taste of celebratory booze after a hard-won fight. And then, he poured in Makino. He poured in the quiet peace of her bar, the light in her eyes, the feeling of her hand in his, the taste of their first kiss, the fierce, unwavering strength of her love. He poured in every single messy, chaotic, painful, beautiful, unplannable, unpredictable piece of data that made up a free life. He overloaded the system. The God Tree heart, a being of pure, divine order, was flooded with a tsunami of chaotic, emotional, living information. It was a data set it could not compute. It was a song in a language it could not understand. Imul screamed, a sound of pure, synthetic agony as the chaotic data flooded his own perfect, ordered mind. The visions of a sterile world shattered, replaced by flashes of a lonely boy on a swing. A loud-mouthed pirate captain with a straw hat, a kind woman with green hair humming a soft tune. The God Tree heart, unable to process the paradox, overloaded. It didn't explode, it imploded. With a final, silent shriek, the massive, pulsating jewel cracked, and its light died, turning into a dull, dead stone. Imul fell to his knees, the power draining from him, leaving him as just a frail, pale figure in a crumbling room. He looked at Naruto, his void-like eyes for the first time filled with something other than cold logic. It was confusion, the look of a perfect machine that has just encountered an unsolvable equation. How? His voice, no longer in Naruto's mind but a weak, physical whisper, asked. Your life, it is so noisy. That's the point, Naruto said, panting. Drained but victorious. The sanctuary, its power source dead, began to crumble. The entire fortress groaned, chunks of the ceiling falling as the anti-gravity systems failed. Naruto turned and ran, the fortress collapsing around him. He met up with Shanks and the rest of the crew, who were already fighting their way back to the ships. The red hair pirates, battered but triumphant, made a mad dash for freedom as their enemy's perfect world fell from the sky. They escaped, sailing out of the dying storm as the sanctuary, the architect's dream, plunged into the churning sea and vanished beneath the waves. The war was over. The world was safe, for now. Weeks later, the Red Force was once again anchored in the calm, clear waters of Fuchsia Bay. The marine fortress on the headland was still there. But it was a hollow shell, its purpose gone, its purifier agents long since vanished along with their master. Naruto walked up the path to Party's bar. He was just a man in an orange jacket. The weight of two worlds finally, blessedly, feeling a little lighter. He pushed open the doors. She was there, behind the counter, a gentle smile on her face as if he'd only been gone for an afternoon. The tiny, glowing sapling on the shelf was now a thriving, miniature tree, its light brighter than ever. He didn't need to say a word. He walked behind the bar, took the rag from her unresisting hand, and began to wipe down the counter, falling into the familiar, peaceful rhythm. "Welcome home," Makino said softly. He looked at her, his heart full. He didn't need a throne or a title. He didn't need to be a Hokage or a hero. All he needed was this. This quiet bar, this peaceful village, this incredible woman. He had fought gods and monsters, traversed worlds, and toppled a silent tyrant. And it had all led him here. He was already home. Makino smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. She leaned against the counter, watching him, and began to hum a soft, gentle tune. It was a simple melody, one with no words, but it was full of warmth, and peace, and the promise of 1,000 quiet, happy tomorrows. It was their song, an aria for a world they had fought to keep beautifully, gloriously, unchained. Chapter 7 End.